Chapter 349, Fleeing to Yuanwu. Immediately after Han Li and company heard Martial Uncle Huang's voice, the Cloudwind banner suddenly flashed with blinding yellow light. The burst of radiance contracted and then swelled before exploding. A white mist even thicker than before madly rushed forth from the banner and enveloped both enemies and allies in the blink of an eye. "You're courting death." A roar from the human skeleton traveled through the fog along with the furious, charming voice of the seductive woman. Afterwards, the sound of huge explosions started echoing through the mist. It was obvious that Martial Uncle Huang was currently fighting with the two Devil Dao Core formation cultivators. Han Li and company didn't allow this opportunity provided by their martial uncle to slip by. At nearly the same moment that the mist appeared, the yellow Maple Valley cultivators scattered in all directions, flying off on their magic tools. Relying on the Divine Wind boat's great speed, Han Li shot through the fog. Han Li chose to flee in the direction that held the most enemy cultivators. Although the enemies there were numerous, Han Li felt that their magic power and cultivation was weaker, thereby being the best direction to break through. However, many of his fellow sect members didn't understand this, and the majority of them chose the directions that held fewer enemies. Han Li could only look on with disapproval. In an instant, Han Li had taken advantage of the chaotic situation to arrive at the edge of the encirclement. The mist at the edge of the enclosure was much weaker, allowing the Devil Dao cultivators to notice Han Li's rushing figure. But because Han Li was using the Azure Fire miasma, they were only able to see a large cloud of azure red smoke, leaving them stunned. However, three nearby Devil Dao cultivators immediately came to their senses and simultaneously launched their attacks. A streak of golden light, 3 streaks of yellow light, and a large ball of black chi shot toward Han Li's direction. Han Li snorted and pointed to the tortoise shell, causing it to immediately swell to several times its original size. At that same moment, he madly poured more spiritual power into the Divine Wind boat in an attempt to fly as fast as possible. Han Li had already come to the conclusion that now was not the time to be tangled up in a battle. If other enemies were allowed to ensnare him, he would no longer be able to run. Therefore, he poured most of his magic power into his flying magic tool as it was a race against time to escape. This was only possible due to the great confidence Han Li had in his tortoise shell, as it was even harder than his white scale shield. While Han Li was still thinking, the golden and yellow streaks of light collided with the tortoise shell. Just as Han Li had expected, they were forcibly blocked. However, the ball of black chi was unexpectedly tricky, and it suddenly split in two when it smashed against the tortoise shell. The halves slipped around the sides of the tortoise shell before reforming. Although it had been delayed for a moment, it still arrived at Han Li's side. The ball of black chi turned into a 10-meter large ghost head, attempting to swallow Han Li along with his Divine Wind boat. Han Li sneered in response. With a single wave of his arm, over 100 fireballs appeared, tearing the ghost head apart in an instant. Over the course of the war, Han Li had grown quite familiar with such elementary Devil Dao arts. Taking advantage of the opening, Han Li exhaled and sped past the evaporated ghost head. In an instant, he had broken through the enclosure, leaving the Devil Dao cultivators behind him. Although their attacks were not successful, the Devil Dao cultivators were naturally unwilling to just let him go. They cursed before hastily chasing after Han Li on their own flying magic tools. However, Han Li didn't pay any attention to his pursuers, only focusing on flying at the greatest speed possible. As Han Li expected, the curses of the Devil Dao cultivators sounded further away and rarer as time passed. Flight magic tools capable of such speed as the Divine Wind boat were seldom seen after all. Finally, after a mad rush lasting a few hours, not a single person could be seen behind him. Even with this, Han Li still didn't dare to grow complacent and continued speeding along for a moment before slowing down and carefully examining his surroundings. He then stamped his foot on his Divine Wind boat, shooting away once more. Han Li's current condition wasn't very good. Almost half of his magic power had been consumed in the creation of the United Defensive Barrier. With the additional magic power consumed during his mad rush, he was in dire need to replenish his magic power. Otherwise, he would be in dire straits if he were to encounter an enemy. With that in mind, Han Li descended onto a desolate mountain and put away his Azure Fire miasma. He then found a concealed location behind a huge rock and sat down cross-legged behind it. Afterwards, he took out a blue mid-grade spirit stone from his storage pouch and started to replenish his magic power. Crooked Soul stood by his side and kept watch. Not long after Han Li sat down, a streak of red light flew across the sky in a panic. Soon after, 6 streaks of black and green light chased after it. It was obvious that an unlucky person had managed to get snared a second time. Han Li didn't pay further attention to them and slowly closed his eyes, his mind sinking into a state of emptiness to recover magic power at even greater speed. After an indeterminate length of time had passed, Han Li opened his eyes. Having nearly recovered the entirety of his magic power, he was unwilling to stay here for even a second longer. He looked up at the sky and saw that it was now dusk. He was just in time to make his escape under the cover of night. However, Han Li didn't make any haphazard movements. Instead, he took a moment to carefully observe his surroundings with his spiritual sense and confirmed that there were no Devil Dao cultivators nearby. It seemed that they were now pursuing the main Yellow Maple Valley group, after having dealt with the failed ambush. With the enemy's strength in mind, Han Li shook his head. Everything pointed to disaster for the main group. Han Li gave it no more thought and released his divine wind boat. After making sure of the direction to the state of Yuanwu, Han Li and Crooked Soul took off. Although a majority of the cultivators from the state of Yuanwu had met their end in the state of Yue, it would still take several months for the 6 Devil Dao sects to fully conquer the state of Yue. For the time being, the state of Yuanwu could still be considered safe. Han Li didn't plan to go to the meeting location and assemble with the main group. The main group may have already been pursued by the Devil Dao. To go there now would just be looking for more trouble. Furthermore, Han Li could take advantage of this opportunity to search for a new place to cultivate. If he were to follow Yellow Maple Valley to another country, he would only be a high-level steward at best. Han Li was unwilling to live such a life. If Han Li's thoughts were correct, after the Devil Dao annexed these countries, they would eventually gather their strength and resume fighting against the righteous Dao Alliance. When that time came, the whole Heavenly South region would no longer be safe. This was in opposition to Han Li's intention to peacefully cultivate. If he were to go the state of Yuanwu now and see how the situation developed, couldn't he both find out whether or not the transportation formation could be restored and still see how the situation unfolded? If the circumstances were truly terrible, he planned to use the transportation formation to travel to a different land and avoid the upcoming war. As Han Li silently sunk into contemplation, his divine wind boat turned into a streak of white light, and he disappeared into the horizon. 2 days later, Han Li arrived at the border between the state of Yue and Yuanwu after taking a meandering route. He turned his head to look at the mountains of the state of Yue and lightly sighed before flying into Yuanwu along with Crooked Soul. Han Li couldn't have known that half a day later, a squad of several tens of Devil Dao cultivators would be stationed at this location. They were responsible for guarding 50 kilometers along the border to intercept any state of Yue cultivators that intended to enter the state of Yuanwu. Once Han Li entered the state of Yuanwu, he first headed toward Golden Horse City. After 4 days, he eventually arrived at the West Hills of Golden Horse City. Observing carefully from the sky, Han Li eventually found Xianxia's residence and slowly descended. Han Li jumped off the boat, sweeping his gaze in every direction. What he saw left him stunned. The stone rooms leaned at an unsteady angle, and all the rocks and azure bamboo were broken and scattered. They were most likely destroyed. In addition, the defensive formation's Xianxia won. Xianxia was the Qi condensation cultivator that gave him the 5 phases reversal formation in exchange for a rare medicinal herb, last mentioned in chapter 275, had laid out were broken through by force. Han Li's face darkened, and he flipped his hand, taking out a magic tool. He then walked over to the mostly toppled rooms. Although it seemed like this had occurred long ago, it was still prudent to be cautious. Han Li searched the rooms, and among the destroyed interiors, he found a thoroughly rotted corpse. Han Li pinched his nose and took a long, careful look at the corpse's face. He wrinkled his brow. The corpse was Xianxia, but rather the loyal shopkeeper in charge of his store. Much to his relief, Han Li found no other corpses in the other rooms. After Han Li finished searching, his expression suddenly grew cold. His body turned into a blur, instantly reappearing on the divine wind boat. He then turned his gaze toward the southern sky. Above the southern hills, 2 streaks of deep blue light shot straight toward his location. A moment later, they landed not far in front of Han Li. Once the light faded away, an old man and a youth were revealed. The old man had a common appearance, aside from his thin, slender eyes and goatee. He was a Foundation establishment cultivator and wore an expression of bewilderment. The other person was a handsome youth that appeared to be about 20 years old. He was fiercely staring at Han Li with a baleful gaze, despite being only a chi condensation cultivator. Chapter 350, Instant Kill. Han Li calmly looked at the two without speaking a word. However, he clearly understood that these two most likely had something to do with Xianxia's residence being destroyed. In response to Han Li's silence, the youth couldn't help but ask, "Who is your esteemed self, and what is your relationship with that fellow named Qi?" Upon hearing this, Han Li merely gave the youth a cold glance before ignoring him and turning his gaze back to the old man. It was obvious that, with regard to cultivation, the old man was the one who was truly in charge. When the youth saw Han Li disregard him, he was furious. Although he knew that Han Li was a Foundation establishment cultivator, his clan was one of the most prestigious clans in the state of Yuanwu. He had never been treated like this before. Furthermore, due to the matter regarding Xianxia, he was already filled with anger. Thus, he clenched his teeth and wanted to release his magic tools. But just as he was about to move his arm, the old man grabbed onto it, stopping him. "Not yet. We still don't know who this person is. We must find that out first before we take further action," the old man stated with a calm expression. The youth then glanced somewhat suspiciously at Crooked Soul, who stood behind Han Li. Crooked Soul didn't have the aura of a living person, yet he could feel magic power fluctuations from his body. He felt that it was inconceivable. When Han Li heard this, his eyes narrowed. The old man was a mid-Foundation establishment cultivator, yet he spoke as if he were not to be trifled with, causing Han Li to grow slightly apprehensive. "Were you the ones who destroyed this place?" Han Li asked with poise. "What relation does fellow Taoist have with Xianxia? Are you from the Qi clan?" The old man responded to Han Li's question with his own. Han Li slightly wrinkled his brow. It seemed the other party wouldn't honestly answer him, as he only exchanged one question for another. "Seems like we both don't wish to answer one another. Wouldn't it be better to exchange answers with each other? That way we can waste less of each other's time," Han Li asked with raised eyebrows. The old man was surprised for a moment, but after pondering for a moment he agreed. "Since I was the one who proposed this, how about you ask first?" Han Li said insipidly. "Is your esteemed self a member of the Qi clan?" The old man immediately asked without a trace of politeness. In turn, Han Li responded without the slightest of hesitation, "I am not." Having heard Han Li's resolute reply, both the old man and the youth were surprised and revealed an expression of doubt. "Is Xianxia currently dead or alive?" Han Li unhurriedly asked. "He's still alive." The old man hesitated for a moment before answering. The word "still alive" immediately put Han Li's heart at ease. "What relationship does your esteemed self have with Xianxia?" the old man cautiously asked. "I have a business deal with him," Han Li coldly responded. "A business deal?" Surprise flashed through the old man's eyes. "Where is Xianxia currently?" Although Han Li asked this casually, he was feeling quite worried. "I cannot tell you this," the old man instantly rejected. "Then I will change the question. Why did you attack Xianxia?" Han Li immediately asked another question without batting an eye at his refusal. "He killed members of our Fu clan. Why shouldn't we kill him?" The youth to the side quickly answered with a sneer. The old man wrinkled his brow, revealing a trace of annoyance, but he didn't say anything more. Fu clan. When Han Li heard this, he was instantly reminded of those Qi condensation cultivators he had killed while saving Xin Ryanwan. Xianxia's unrequited love and master of formation spells, introduced in Chapter 277. He now felt a great desire to kill. So it was like that. However, there are only two of you here. If the Qi clan were to come here with a formidable character, how would you be able to match them? Han Li casually asked this while appearing indifferent. How could any foreign cultivator sent by the Qi clan oppose the two of us from the Fu clan? Could it be that we are not enough? The youth proudly answered Han Li's inquiry. So you two are here alone? Han Li suddenly asked with a deep voice. Why are you asking this? The youth was thinking of how to respond with an angry expression, but the old man at his side suddenly asked this with suspicion. However, it was already too late. Han Li suddenly raised his arms and shot 2 streaks of black light toward the youth. Afterwards, he patted his storage pouch, releasing over 10 streaks of white light. In the blink of an eye, those lights transformed into puppet beasts and puppet soldiers. Once those puppets appeared, they immediately released a mad barrage of light beams and light arrows. When the old man saw this, he felt aghast. His body instantly blurred and appeared beside the youth, summoning a copper coin magic tool in front of him. In an instant, it grew to the size of a table and blocked the incoming attacks. A series of explosions could be heard as numerous beams of light struck the copper coin. Each strike pushed the old man further and further back, much to his dismay. But in the next moment, the youth next to him let out a miserable shriek, causing the old man to hastily turn his head in dread. But as he turned his head, his neck suddenly felt cold and everything went dark. After the old man's headless body fell to the ground, Han Li was the only one remaining in the air with a faintly shining thread tied to the ring finger of his right hand. Just a moment ago, Han Li took advantage of the massive, eye-catching assault to conceal his movements. By using the smoke-shifting steps, he was able to travel over 60 meters away from his divine wind boat in a few breaths, arriving behind the two. Then, with a wave of his string, he was able to easily behead them. Han Li had found this battle to be as easy as dusting off his clothes. Han Li found it quite humorous. In a battle between Foundation establishment cultivators, elemental defensive barriers basically weren't used because they were unable to block the attacks of top-grade magic techniques. They required too much time to activate, and they were far too expensive. Thus, most people used defensive magic tools to protect themselves instead of defensive light barriers that they felt were useless. That kind of thinking had given Han Li many openings to take advantage of. This was especially apparent when Han Li originally fought the Devil Dao cultivators at the border, as a majority of his kills had died in this manner. Now that he thought about it, this particular killing technique was quite similar to that of the Black Fiend School's blood servant, Ice Demon. It was as fast as lightning. By the time they hear the thunder, it was already too late. Unfortunately, this technique could only be used on the ground. Otherwise, Han Li would have no one to fear among Foundation establishment cultivators. Han Li lightly shook his head, feeling a great sense of lamentation in his heart. He walked in front of the headless corpses and collected their storage pouches. After he inspected them with his spiritual sense, he felt some disappointment. Although they possessed 3 top-grade magic tools, they were of common quality. Han Li did not have much use for them. On the other hand, that copper coin was a rarely seen defensive magic tool. With that in mind, Han Li restored it to its original size and had it fly into his hand. After happily admiring it for a moment, he flung 2 small fireballs toward the headless corpses and turned them into ashes. Back in the boat with Crooked Soul, Han Li circled through the vicinity once before taking to the skies. This time, he would go to that small mountain with Xin Ryan's residence. He hoped her home was well hidden enough that it hadn't encountered any mishaps. 6 hours later, Han Li arrived at the nameless mountain of Xin Ryan's residence. When Han Li saw that the fog above the mountain was intact and the same as before, he felt overjoyed. After musing for a short while, Han Li didn't dare to fly down. Instead, he flew halfway up the mountain before taking out a sound transmission talisman. He then softly whispered a few words into it before throwing it out. The sound transmission talisman turned into a fiery streak of light and flew towards the mountain, suddenly disappearing from sight. Soon after, a large portion of the fog rose and completely enveloped him. Han Li stood still as he saw a scene bloom before him, leaving him surrounded by gargantuan trees over 300 meters tall. He couldn't help but feel shocked, feeling like an ant among the huge trees. Still, he knew that once Xin Ryan received the sound transmission talisman, she should be quick to come meet him. As expected, the huge tree illusions turned into thick fog a short moment later. Then the fog parted and revealed a 3-meter-wide passageway. The passage was remarkably long. After traveling for over 200 meters, he was finally able to faintly see its opening and couldn't help but grow excited. But when he was about 20 meters away from the exit, he suddenly heard a hoarse woman's voice. "Senior Han, who is that person behind you? You shouldn't be bringing strangers to this place." Chapter 351, Xianxia's Death. When Han Li heard this, he faintly smiled and immediately explained, "Young Miss Xin has misunderstood. This individual by my side isn't a living person. He's just a corpse that I had refined. Once young Miss Xin inspects him with her spiritual sense, it will be made clear." After Han Li said this, he took the initiative to stop and wait for Xin Ryan to recognize Crooked Soul as a Jiangshi. A short moment later, Xin Ryan responded, "Ah, I was mistaken. Senior Han, please come in." Xin Ryan's tone was apologetic, but Han Li paid it no mind. flying forward on his divine wind boat with a smile. Just as Han Li flew forward, the scene before him brightened as the bamboo rooms that he had seen on his previous trip appeared once more. Two women were standing in front of the bamboo rooms, Xin Ryan and her pretty maid. While both were wearing pure white clothes, Xin Ryan's style of dress left Han Li stunned. Widow Xin, pay her respects to Senior Han. When Xin Ryan saw Han Li arrive, she stepped forward and gracefully greeted him. However, her haggard appearance raised Han Li's suspicions. There is no need for young Lady Xin to be so courteous. Han Li continued on with a few polite niceties. At this moment, the young maid behind Xin Ryan stepped forward and greeted Han Li. Han Li inattentively nodded his head in response. It was obvious that Xin Ryan didn't intend to stand there and have a long chat with Han Li. With a forced smile, she led Han Li to one of the larger bamboo rooms. Upon entering the room, Han Li was left dumbstruck. Right beside the door, there was a table with a pitch-black memorial tablet with the words, Husband Xianxia, carved into it in large characters. There was a small incense burner in front of the memorial tablet with several lit incense sticks slowly releasing smoke. Having seen this, how could Han Li not know what had happened? Han Li was beyond surprised to find that Xianxia had actually passed away. After he had recovered from his shock, he lightly sighed and took the initiative to approach the table. After taking out an incense stick, lighting it, and paying his respects, he placed it inside the incense burner. Young Lady Xin, how did this happen? After he finished paying his respects, Han Li turned his head and asked in a soft voice. There is much to say. How about I give Senior Han a proper explanation in another room? Xin Ryan said with a feeble voice as the corner of her eyes reddened. As of now, Xin Ryan was no longer the intelligent and shrewd woman he remembered. He only saw a pitiful young woman. In response, Han Li silently nodded his head. Xin Ryan then led Han Li to a neighboring room and sat down. The young maid quickly steeped a pot of tea for Han Li and poured him a cup. Han Li lightly sipped the fragrant tea before setting down the cup and speaking with a solemn voice. I truly didn't expect that after several months, fellow Taoist Qi would encounter mishaps. The heavens truly enjoy toying with men. Ah yes, when did fellow Taoist Qi and young Lady Xin marry? Had I known about it, I definitely would have sent a gift. Xin Ryan bitterly smiled in response. Without waiting for her to speak, her maid answered on her behalf. Senior, my clan's young madam decided to voluntarily live as young Master Qi's widow after his death. Han Li was left utterly shocked and couldn't help but gaze at Xin Ryan in astonishment. Xiaomei speaks truly. I have decided to observe widowhood on young Master Qi's behalf. Xin Ryan confirmed this, slowly nodding her head in response to Han Li's gaze of astonishment. Han Li was left speechless. This one has received life-saving kindness from young Master Qi on numerous occasions, a debt that can't possibly be paid back. If young Master Qi were still alive, it would only be a matter of time before I married him. Now, I'm merely doing what I should. As she calmly said this, Xin Ryan reached out with her flawless hand and lightly pulled away a strand of her beautiful hair that laid against her forehead. Han Li naturally had nothing suitable to say in response. Xin Ryan then continued, detachedly giving Han Li an explanation of how Xianxia's death came to be. Due to Han Li's exhortations, Xianxia and Xin Ryan were very careful and rarely went outside after he left. Nevertheless, after 2 months, Xin Ryan lacked some direly needed materials to research the spell formation and had no choice but to make a trip to a nearby market city. This matter had unexpectedly been found out by Xianxia. As someone who was wholeheartedly infatuated with Xin Ryan, he offered to make the trip for her. However, they couldn't possibly have known that the cultivators Han Li had slaughtered to save Xin Ryan were actually juniors from one of the greatest cultivation clans of the state of Yuanwu, the Fu clan. As many juniors of their lineage had disappeared without reason, the Fu clan naturally pursued the matter to the finest thread. As a result, a few Fu clan cultivators wandering nearby had come across Xianxia, who had just recently emerged. Had Xianxia been shrewd or experienced enough, he would have been able to deal with any situation that arose. But unfortunately, he was far too naive and inexperienced. After only being asked a few questions related to the disappearance, he lost himself to panic and aroused the suspicions of the Fu clan members. They immediately wanted to arrest him and bring him back for interrogation. Naturally, Xianxia didn't wait for himself to be captured. With the formidable magic tools he had on hand, he forcibly escaped from the Fu clan Qi condensation cultivators and fled back to his residence. As such, Xianxia had doomed himself to calamity. The Fu clan cultivators were able to quickly track him back to his residence. However, the great formation he had laid down managed to severely injure or kill over 10 of their cultivators. In their fury, the Fu clan had actually dispatched a core formation expert. After half a day of fierce attacks, they were able to forcibly break through his great formation. However, no one had expected that Xianxia would hastily lay down an even more ferocious illusion formation behind his first formation, while the tide was against him. He managed to trap the core formation cultivator within, giving him the opportunity to escape. Naturally, the other Fu clan cultivators weren't going to let him go so easily. Although Xianxia was able to break through their siege by using the remnants of his formation spell, he sustained mortal wounds in the process, and his loyal shopkeeper had died as well. Shortly after arriving at Xin Ryan's residence, Xianxia took his last breath. The Fu clan was unaware of this and resentfully searched for Xianxia at every location. In addition, they had dispatched experts to monitor his residence. In this case, it was the old man and the youth from the Fu clan that Han Li had killed. After hearing Xin Ryan's account, Han Li felt a slight twinge of sadness. Although Han Li wasn't a close friend with Xianxia by any means, he still felt that he was a pretty decent person. To think that he would die so young, the world was truly a fickle place. Senior Han must have come here for the ancient transportation formation. Having finished her account, Xin Ryan suddenly mentioned this. Oh, that matter isn't urgent. Han Li spoke with embarrassment. After all, her husband had just died. This was not the appropriate time to inquire about such matters. I've just about restored the transportation formation. It should be finished in a month, Xin Ryan continued, not seeming to mind Han Li's embarrassment. Really? Han Li couldn't help but grow excited and revealed a somewhat happy expression. Yes, really. Not only will I restore the transportation formation, but I also have 2 things to give to Senior Han, Xin Ryan calmly said, taking 2 jade boxes out of her storage pouch and setting them on the table. What's this? Han Li blankly stared on in surprise. One of the boxes contains Xianxia's insights, my husband's collection of tool refinement records. The other box contains a large amount of books on the Tao of formation spells and my expertise in formation spells. I hope that Senior Han will accept these items, Xin Ryan faintly said. Han Li's heart trembled. After taking a look at the 2 jade boxes, he looked at Xin Ryan with a calm expression and asked, "What do you want, young lady Xin? Why do you want to give such precious items to me? Please speak bluntly." Han Li's voice held a trace of coldness. "I am giving these items as a gift to Senior Han in return for a promise." Xin Ryan didn't avoid Han Li's gaze, revealing an unwavering expression. This promise being, although Han Li could faintly guess what she wanted, he still asked this with a heavy tone. If Senior Han were to one day enter core formation, I wish for Senior Han to thoroughly exterminate the Fu clan from the state of Yuanwu on my and Xianxia's behalf. Xin Ryan's voice was as cold as ice frozen for countless years. When Han Li heard this, the resentment contained within her words caused even his heart to tremble. Chapter 352, Promise. Han Li didn't immediately refuse or agree. Instead, he tightly wrinkled his brow and lowered his head in silence, weighing the potential gains and losses. Truth be told, Han Li was unwilling to agree. As of current, Han Li held little interest in spell formation and tool refinement techniques. Only after he successfully reached core formation would he have the time to research such things. In addition, he was unwilling to provoke a huge cultivator clan for no reason, not to mention that he didn't have the ability to do so. I understand that this request is overreaching, but Ryan truly doesn't have any other way. Xin Ryan gave a bleak smile with a pale complexion. Elder Brother Qi's death by the Fu clan was because of the incident that I brought about. If I do not avenge my husband, then I wouldn't have the face to see him after I die. I would prefer to go to hell, Xin Ryan softly whispered with a pleading tone. When Han Li heard her say die, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows as he suddenly thought of something. He suddenly raised his head, taking a careful look at Xin Ryan's complexion and leaving Xin Ryan stunned in response. There is something amiss with your complexion. Let me see your veins. Han Li spoke in an irrefutable tone, greatly surprising Xin Ryan. A queer glint flashed from her eyes. After a moment of hesitation, she obediently handed Han Li her flawless wrist. Han Li impolitely brought 2 fingers to her wrist and poured a strand of spiritual qi into her body. A long while later, Han Li's expression became unsightly. Are you aware that your blood vessels have completely withered away? If this is not addressed, you will die within 2 years, Han Li coldly said after withdrawing his hand. Xin Ryan faintly smiled in response to Han Li's assertion. Of course I know this. How could I not know about my own body? My constitution is of the dragon's cry, a male body wrongly born as female. If someone with this constitution were to forcefully cultivate, their meridians would gradually wither away along with their lifespan. For me to have lived this long was by mere luck. Originally, I had hoped to find an ancient formula to cure this illness. However, I failed, merely wasting the many spiritual medicines that elder brother Qi had searched for in vain. Xin Ryan revealed an expression of self-mockery. Young madam, Xin Ryan's maid couldn't help but shout out with sadness from behind her. It's nothing, Zio Mei. I'm only going to see elder brother Qi a bit sooner. This is exactly what I desire. Xin Ryan unexpectedly consoled her maid with a peaceful expression. Han Li's expression grew soft, and for some unknown reason, he truly felt pity toward her. But unfortunately, Han Li couldn't do anything about Xin Ryan's strange illness and could only watch on as her life and beauty withered away. Since Senior Han now knows of this matter, he should understand why I have acted in this manner. Although Senior is currently only a Foundation Establishment cultivator, you are the sole person familiar with Elder Brother Qi and me that has a chance of avenging him. I don't require Senior to swear an oath. I only want a promise, so that I may pass away with ease. Xin Ryan returned to her previously calm demeanor and nonchalantly mentioned the matter of vengeance again. Han Li stroked his nose with all his strength, finding himself in a rather difficult position. But after a moment of hard thought, he suddenly asked, what about those from fellow Taoist Qi's clan? Humph, the Qi clan. They are merely a common clan within the state of Yuanwu. How could they dare to offend the Fu clan? Besides, Elder Brother Qi was only an external branch disciple driven out from the sect. They couldn't be less concerned. As for me, I've learned everything from a nameless formation spell grandmaster. He was a rogue cultivator that had long since passed away. Xin Ryan understood what Han Li meant and explained her and Qi Yunxiao's background to Han Li in a soft voice. Han Li's mind grew quiet. He had truly thought that this woman had an alternative. Fine, I can give young lady Xin this promise. However, I will only act when I possess the ability to do so. If such an opportunity does not appear in my lifetime, will you regret it? After pondering for a long while, Han Li took a deep breath and spoke in a heavy voice. That will be enough. So long as you can give me hope, it will do. Let me thank Senior Han in advance. Xin Ryan couldn't help but widely smile in response, suddenly appearing daintily beautiful. Han Li was stunned as he took in her beauty. But soon after, he shook his head and bluntly swiped his sleeve across the table, causing 2 jade boxes to disappear without a trace into his storage pouch. Since you require another month to restore the transportation formation, then I will have to trouble young lady Xin in a month's time. I will now be taking my leave. Han Li spoke unhurriedly as he stood up. With this gap of time available, he had quite a few matters to attend to. This one pays Senior her respects, Xin Ryan said respectfully without further urging Han Li to stay. As a result, Han Li flew to the Heavenly Star Sect's market city with Crooked Soul in tow. After a day, Han Li arrived in the vicinity of the market city. After he took out a cloak from his storage pouch and covered his face, he entered the market city with a swagger, bringing Crooked Soul along with him. As Han Li walked through the streets of the market city, he was astonished to find so many cultivators trading and bustling about. There were several times as many cultivators compared to the last time he came here. In addition to the hurried atmosphere, there were also a few rarely seen Foundation Establishment cultivators within the city. After pondering for a moment, Han Li's eyes flashed with thoughtfulness. But soon after, he tossed the matter to the back of his mind and went straight toward that magic tool store that helped him craft his magic tools on his previous trip. He had a few materials that could be refined into useful magic tools, thereby increasing his own strength. That magic tool store still looked exactly the same as before. Even its arrogant signboard was completely the same. Han Li entered the store with a faint smile. The circumstances within the store caused Han Li's brow to slightly furrow. The tiny store actually had 6 people standing and sitting around. When they saw Han Li enter, they couldn't help but glance at him. When Han Li saw them, he swept his cold gaze past them without a trace of politeness. In response, they immediately lowered their heads. As Qi condensation cultivators, they naturally wouldn't dare to offend Han Li, a senior Foundation establishment cultivator. But a man with a fiendish appearance sitting in a chair looked at Han Li without the slightest hint of fear. Although he was only an early Foundation establishment, he didn't turn his gaze away. Han Li didn't pay him any mind and walked over to the two store employees that were chatting. "Is store owner Su here?" Han Li calmly asked the burly man called Dahe. "Senior who?" The burly man revealed an expression of doubt. Han Li sighed and took out the black dragon claws, revealing them to him. He was assisting at the side as this magic tool was created. There was no way he wouldn't have recognized it. So it turned out to be Senior. "This one will call Master out." The burly man's eyes brightened, recognizing the black dragon claws as Han Li had expected. He immediately apologized with a wide grin and hastily ran to the back courtyard. Seeing that Han Li was the store owner's acquaintance, the others couldn't help but look at each other in shock. However, nobody dared to untactfully bother Han Li. Not long after, the fully white-haired shop owner welcomed Han Li with a beaming smile. On his last trip, Han Li left him with a significant amount of rare materials. It was only natural for the old man to give him such a warm welcome. "This small old man is honored to have Senior come to my shop once more. Does Senior wish to refine more magic tools?" After exchanging a few pleasantries, Old Man Su impatiently asked with a face full of anticipation. Han Li faintly smiled and deliberately swept his gaze past the other cultivators in the room. "How foolish of me," shop owner Su exclaimed, immediately understanding what Han Li had meant. He then invited Han Li to the rear courtyard and excitedly led the way. The others didn't dare to say anything, except for the large, fiendish man who snorted with dissatisfaction. He was greatly angered at how differently he was treated compared to Han Li, as he was also a Foundation establishment cultivator who had even sought out this tool refinement store. In response to the large man's snort, Han Li shot an ice-cold glance at him. Han Li had killed no small number of cultivators and unconsciously carried a murderous aura as a result. That single glance immediately caused the large man to feel as if his entire body had turned to ice, and he couldn't help but reveal an expression of terror. Having seen the large man's expression had changed, Han Li didn't pay him any further attention and brought Crooked Soul along with him to the rear courtyard. At that moment, Dahe cleverly stepped forward and apologized to the others, casually giving them an excuse in an attempt to placate their discontent. "Did Senior bring back more materials?" When Han Li and Crooked Soul entered the rear courtyard, shop owner Su glanced at Crooked Soul with slight surprise before impatiently asking Han Li. Chapter 353, The Stardust Pavilion. Han Li wore a slight smile when he saw the old man's eagerness. He casually took out the materials-filled storage pouch and turned it upside down. A white light suddenly shone, and the materials Han Li obtained from the white spider and demon mantis poured out onto the ground. "This is..." The shop owner crouched over and gathered together the white spider's lower limbs, inspecting them with rapt attention. He revealed an expression of puzzlement. Although the old man was a tool-refining expert, he didn't understand much about rare, strange insects. As a result, even if he were able to see that the materials were unordinary, he was still left baffled. Han Li smiled for a moment before giving him an explanation. Most of these materials came from the limbs and shell of a white spider. There are also the wings and forelimbs of a huge demon mantis. They were both grade for demonic beasts. As for the mantis, it was a peak grade for demonic beast and was exceptionally powerful. I hope that your esteemed self will be able to properly make use of these materials. I had to spend quite a bit of effort to obtain them. Materials obtained from grade 4 demonic beasts. The white-haired old man shouted in astonishment and immediately sank into ecstasy. Not to mention grade 4 demon beasts, even materials from grade 2 demon beasts were rarely seen. That's right, shop owner Su. However, for this set of magic tools, I have a particular request for what is to be created. I will only allow you to work with them if you are able to fulfill my request. Payment will be handled the same as before. If there are any leftover materials, you may keep a portion of them to do with as you please," Han Li said calmly. "Senior, please feel at ease. Regardless of the request, this small old man will comply. To be able to personally refine such top-grade materials, I didn't spend my life pursuing the Tao of tool refinement in vain." Shop owner Su then picked up the mantis arms and caressed them with a fanatical gaze. Han Li was surprised to see him with such an expression, but his heart grew increasingly at ease. He spoke to the old man with a gentle tone. "The magic tools that I request you refine are rather unusual. I wish for you to refine the spider legs into a set of offensive magic tools. As for the mantis, they... 2 hours later, Han Li and Crooked Soul left the tool refinement shop. He had come to an agreement with shop owner Su after the shop owner inspected the materials. Several days later, the shop owner would finish his plans for the methods of their refinement. At that time, Han Li would return with the materials and they would officially start their refinement. But for now, Han Li had an opportunity to take a proper stroll around the market city. His suspicions were finally confirmed by an old man as he was browsing around. It turned out that news of the defeat of the state of Yue and their 2 allied countries had spread to the state of Yuanwu. Regardless of whether they were from a cultivator clan or unaffiliated, all of those in the state of Yuanwu felt both uncertainty and premonitions of hardship. Consequently, massive numbers of cultivators flocked to the market city. Many even brought along their rare treasures to trade for direly needed items, thereby increasing their strength to brave the upcoming catastrophe. Within a short few days, all the market cities in the state of Yuanwu began to spread news of precious magic tools, pills, and other such items. A great number of cultivators were instantly attracted, leading to great furor within the market cities. Naturally, Han Li couldn't let such a golden opportunity slip by him. With that in mind, Han Li began to stroll around the shops, taking a look in every direction. As he had expected, there were far more high-quality goods for sale. But much to Han Li's surprise, there were very few top-grade magic tools for sale. Still, it wasn't as if Han Li had any need for those common top-grade magic tools. After walking in nearly a full circle, Han Li had only bought a few uncommon medicinal ingredients that he hadn't seen before. There was nothing else of interest to him. He subsequently headed toward the heart of the market city, the Stardust Pavilion. Having traded in Market City several times, Han Li already knew that if he wanted to buy better goods, he would have to go to the larger, more imposing stores. Only they would have the power to acquire quality goods. Though the small vendors might actually possess a few decent items, they had nothing compared to the collection of a large store. Not long ago, he acquired many quality items from the Thousand Treasures Pavilion of the Yellow Maple Valley Market City. With that line of thought, Han Li brought Crooked Soul along to the Heavenly Star Sect's Stardust Pavilion, a huge, 100-meter-tall building. Han Li was rendered speechless upon entering. This was because there were over 30 cultivators bustling about on the first floor's hall. They were all surrounding several display counters, talking with red-clothed store employees. Not a single person noticed Han Li. Han Li scratched the back of his head and absent-mindedly walked toward a display counter, looking around for the stairs to the second story. 3 chi condensation cultivators stood beside the display counter. One of them was continuously waving a white formation flag while speaking to the store employee in a dissatisfied mumble. The Stardust Pavilion employee appeared to not mind at all. From the very start, he had been giving explanations with a wide smile on his face. However, when these cultivators saw Han Li and Crooked Soul approach them, they immediately grew silent. It was clear that they were very wary of unfamiliar cultivators. When the flag-holding cultivator saw Han Li approach, he hastily brought out several tins of spirit stones to give to the store employee before hastily flying off with his friend. Han Li gloomily gazed at them as they took off. He felt slightly at a loss. But just a moment later, the store employee politely addressed Han Li, "Senior, my sincerest apologies. As this is the first floor, I'm afraid there is nothing of interest here. If Senior truly wishes to find suitable items to purchase, then the floors above the third would be best. Those floors specialize in receiving high-class cultivators." Initially, Han Li was somewhat startled, but he soon recovered his usual bearings. He asked indifferently, "Could you give me an introduction to the floors of the Stardust Pavilion?" The employee appeared slightly surprised, but he respectfully agreed, "Of course. Since it's Senior's first time at our Stardust Pavilion, it's only natural that I introduce our store to you. Our Stardust Pavilion has a total of 9 floors. The first 7 are open to the public, and the last 2 are closed off to outsiders. The first 3 floors are for inferior chi condensation cultivators. Floors 4 through to 6 are for high-grade cultivators such as yourself. As for floors 7 and higher, they are at the service of core formation cultivators." The employee quickly gave Han Li a general introduction to the store. Han Li nodded his head and then wordlessly walked straight toward the stairs to the second floor. The second and third floors were a bit smaller than the first, but the arrangement was obviously more luxurious. It seemed that the farther up he went, the more precious the items that were on sale. With that thought, Han Li quickly passed through floors 2 and 3, even directly passing through the 4th floor. He had originally thought to head straight toward the 6th floor, but a young, red-clothed servant blocked his way. According to the store rules, you must first gain the approval of the 5th floor shopkeeper before being allowed to proceed to the 6th floor. The elegant, young servant expressionlessly said. Although he was only a qi condensation cultivator, he didn't fear Han Li, a foundation establishment cultivator, in the slightest. Han Li wrinkled his brow and headed toward the 5th floor's main hall, instead of becoming angry. Although the main hall wasn't large, there were several young, pretty female servants waiting there. When Han Li walked in, a man and woman were having a relaxed discussion. The man had a common appearance and seemed to be about 35 years old. The woman appeared to be nearing 40 years old and had the grace of a noble woman. It could be seen that in her youth she was a rarely seen beauty. While the two were both foundation establishment cultivators, Han Li was surprised to see that the middle-aged woman was a late foundation establishment cultivator. "Fellow Taoist, do you require any assistance?" When the middle-aged woman saw Han Li enter, she turned her head and gave him an enchanting smile. She spoke with a melodious voice that soothed those who heard it. "I wish to purchase a few truly precious items. Do you have any such items? I don't care whether it is a magic tool, talisman, or anything else." Hearing that Han Li's tone was rather arrogant, the man glanced at Han Li with slight surprise. If fellow Taoist truly wishes to buy quality goods, then he has come to the right place. So long as you have the money to pay, we will definitely leave you satisfied. Although the middle-aged woman was no longer young, her laughter was just as charming as that of a young woman. "But as it happens, this fellow Taoist also wishes to buy quality goods. Please wait for a bit, and I'll take out a few items for you to browse," the woman said with a beaming smile. She then turned her head and gave a command with a serious expression. "Violet Lotus, come and serve these two esteemed guests some tea." "Of course, madam," the maid standing behind the woman respectfully replied. As the middle-aged woman leisurely walked out, the maid poured a cup of tea for Han Li and the man who was originally here. Chapter 354, Madame Lan. Han Li and that man were seated on different sides of the square table. They took several glances at each other, but neither of them had any intention of talking. Cultivators who came here to do their shopping had no intentions of treading too closely to strangers, as it would only breed hostility. Despite this, the man still shot several curious glances at Crooked Soul, who had remained outside the hall by the staircase. Thanks to his perceptiveness, he had already made out Crooked Soul to be a refined corpse, but the spiritual chi fluctuations he felt from Crooked Soul's body left him quite baffled. After all, cultivator-refined, iron-skinned corpses normally only had immense strength. It shouldn't be possible for them to possess magic power. The man strongly suppressed his desire to ask questions. Although Han Li was a mid-foundation establishment cultivator like himself, he was rather wary of him. After Han Li had sipped away most of the tea, the woman finally returned to the main hall. This time she had two strong, robust men following behind her. These two men didn't possess any magic power and had rather stiff faces. They were unexpectedly two realistic-looking puppets. The puppets held a huge tray, wrapped in a bundle of silk cloth. It seemed that the shopkeeper intended on concealing the precious items within it. A strange expression flashed from Han Li's eyes. He had just used his spiritual sense to see through the red silk and find out what was underneath it. However, he hadn't expected that the unremarkable silk cloth would block him. In his surprise, he couldn't help but turn his head to look at the man beside him. He also appeared astonished. It was obvious he had done the same. The middle-aged woman approached Han Li and the man until she was a few steps away. She wordlessly smiled before she spoke. "I've already acquainted myself with you, fellow Taoist fan. Might I ask for your name, fellow Taoist? My surname is Lan. You two fellow Taoists may call me Madame Lan." The woman gave herself a well-practiced introduction. Naturally, Han Li couldn't awkwardly remain silent, so he reluctantly said, "My surname is Han." Afterwards, he said nothing further and displayed a cold demeanor, unwilling to speak further. Madame Lan didn't take this to heart. After all, a vast majority of cultivators that came here feigned indifference like Han Li. It was something she had long become accustomed to. As a result, she smiled slightly and beckoned to the puppets behind her. The well-chiseled puppets immediately walked forward. Afterwards, Madame Lan extended her flawless finger and lifted the red cloth cover, revealing the several items underneath. Han Li and the man surnamed Fan simultaneously gazed at the items on the tray, their eyes gleaming with rapt attention. A long sword, short blade, throwing dart, a ring, and a piece of jet-black armor were arranged in a line. From one glance at the sparkling shine each of these items radiated, one could tell that these were not common goods. Once the magic tools on the dish were clearly seen, Han Li and the man surnamed Fan had differing reactions. The cultivator named Fan intensely stared at the plate with a gaze containing a slight trace of exhilaration. But when Han Li glanced at them, he immediately turned his gaze away, revealing a lack of interest. This greatly surprised Madame Lan, causing her to pay closer attention to Han Li. This item is called the Cold Crystal Blade. It was refined using rare profound crystal and ice jade. Not only are its attacks powerful, it also possesses dark cold chi, capable of unknowingly decreasing the power of enemies in a chaotic battle. It truly is a quality item among top-grade magic tools. The woman calmly introduced the item after deftly grabbing the transparent, sparkling short blade from the tray and lifting it into the air. She then waved the magic tool in her hand, immediately releasing a breeze of icy chi. As soon as it appeared in the room, the chi condensation maids couldn't help but shiver. Could Madame let this one take a look at that blade? The man surnamed Fan looked at the magic tool with excitement. Madame Lan faintly smiled in response and handed over the blade without the slightest of hesitation. Afterwards, she took a hidden glance at Han Li. She only saw Han Li with an indifferent expression. He had merely lowered his head to look at the empty teacup in his hand. As he did not show the slightest interest in this magic tool, Madame Lan felt slightly disappointed. As he was playing around with the short blade in his hand, the man surnamed Fan spoke in a loud voice. "All right, I want to buy this cold crystal blade. How many spirit stones will it cost?" Although Madame Lan was somewhat surprised to hear this, she calmly asked, "Doesn't fellow Taoist Fan intend to look at the other magic tools?" "There is no need. This one naturally knows that the other items are certain to be better. However, this one is embarrassingly short of money. I reckon that this blade is the only one I can buy. So even if the other items are better, this one does not have the heart to see them. This way, I can avoid feeling envy." This cultivator Fan spoke rather honestly with a touch of humor. The beautiful Madame Lan raised her hand to conceal a faint smile. The woman quickly suppressed her smile and spoke methodically as usual. "This cold crystal blade costs 800 spirit stones. Once fellow Taoist Fan hands over that amount, he may take the item and leave." "Good. Could you take a look and check if this is the right amount of spirit stones?" Cultivator Fan bluntly took out a storage pouch. In the blink of an eye, a pile of varied colored spirit stones poured out onto the table. Madame Lan effortlessly swept her gaze across the table. With the corners of her lips slightly raised, she said, "How could I distrust you? There is no need to check." With that said, the woman took her storage pouch and absorbed the spirit stones on the table. Madame Lan's actions gave Cultivator Fan a very favorable impression. He then revealed an amicable expression before taking his leave. But when Han Li saw this, he inwardly laughed in ridicule despite his indifferent expression. "What do you mean by there is no need to check? What was the spiritual sense enveloping the spirit stones supposed to be?" Obviously, Madame Lan's spiritual sense is far stronger than common cultivators and was able to instantly count the number of spirit stones without anybody knowing. As such, she was able to deliberately say such a clever and convenient line. Han Li thought with an inward sneer. Madame Lan hadn't realized that her cheap trick had been seen through by Han Li. After she finished watching Cultivator Fan leave with a faint smile on her face, she turned her gaze upon Han Li once more. "Fellow Taoist Han seems to hold no interest in these items. Could it be that these magic tools aren't worthy of fellow Taoist's notice?" Madame Lan asked with a slight smile. It was quite strange. She clearly knew that the person before her had inferior cultivation to her own. But for some unknown reason, she felt a trace of strange danger from Han Li, causing her speech to unconsciously become more tactful towards him as she didn't dare to offend him. "While the quality of these magic tools are quite decent, I am looking for magic tools that are a bit more exceptional. They must also be well suited to my techniques. Furthermore, not only am I looking for magic tools and talismans, I am also interested in rare items." Han Li replied serenely. Oh, if fellow Taoist Han had such requests, he should have said them sooner. This one had believed that fellow Taoist Han would have been satisfied with any kind of magic tool, the same as fellow Taoist Fan. Madame Lan couldn't help but giggle. She then continued speaking with great confidence. So long as fellow Taoist is able to pay the price, our Stardust Pavilion will provide all the items you desire. Han Li dryly laughed and directly answered with a question. Since Madame insists, I will bluntly mention them. Does your esteemed pavilion have any pill formulas useful to Foundation establishment cultivators for sale, or any sets of magic tools? Naturally, the greater the number in a magic tool set, the better. The woman's face revealed slight emotion before immediately regaining her calm. Madame Lan stared at Han Li with her beautiful eyes before speaking deliberately. Fellow Taoist requests are truly unusual. Were it half a month ago, I may have been left helpless, but now, my pavilion had acquired 2 such pill formulas and a set of high-quality magic tools. The prices of these items are truly great. They are not something that I am able to sell. Fellow Taoist will have to continue this conversation on the 6th floor. Han Li had anticipated what the woman would say and asked indifferently. Then, am I allowed to go up to the 6th floor? Madame Lan lightly brushed her hair before gently smiling. Of course you can, but in accordance to sect rules, I must first inspect fellow Taoist's qualifications. What qualifications? Han Li casually asked. It's very simple. It is whether or not fellow Taoist possesses 1,000 spirit stones or items of equivalent value. The woman stated with an earnest tone. Is this enough? Without any objections, Han Li took out the storage pouch that kept his spirit stones and tossed it toward the woman. Han Li's collection of spirit stones had reached 1,000 long ago. Now, he should be in possession of nearly 2,000 spirit stones. Madame Lan took the storage pouch and examined it with her spiritual sense. She then nodded her head and said, Please follow me. I will personally accompany you to the 6th floor. When Han Li saw her walking towards the stairs, he silently followed after her. The young, red-clothed servant guarding the stairwell silently stepped to the side upon seeing Madame Lan approach. Han Li and Madame Lan then climbed to the 6th floor one after the other. Chapter 355, Red Thread Shadow Chaser Needles. To tell the truth, Han Li was quite curious about the 6th floor shopkeeper. The 5th floor shopkeeper was a late Foundation establishment cultivator. Could the 6th floor cultivator be a core formation expert? Han Li felt slightly excited. Then Han Li glanced at the young, 17-year-old woman that stood behind Madame Lan and was left dumbfounded. The young woman was dressed rather simply, and her beauty was merely above average. However, for this young mortal woman who was lacking even the slightest magic power to be the 6th floor shopkeeper was truly beyond Han Li's expectations. But what was particularly unusual was what happened when the young woman saw Madame Lan climb to the 6th floor. She continuously called out, Auntie Lan, Auntie Lan, with much intimacy. At the same time, she completely overlooked Han Li, causing him to feel sullen. That's enough, Zier. There is a guest here. Although Madame Lan's words were harsh, her tone was filled with obvious affection. Guest, the young woman indifferently glanced at Han Li without the slightest of care. Yes, this fellow Taoist Han wishes to buy pill formulas and the set of magic tools we previously acquired. Thus, I am bringing him to the 6th floor and having you receive him. I have to go back down. There may be more guests arriving at the 5th floor. Madame Lan spoke with great warmth. So it's like that, but the next time Auntie Lan is free, she must definitely come up and keep me company. The young woman spoke with reluctance. Madame Lan gave a kind smile in response before heading back down. The young woman gazed at her as she descended. She eventually turned her head to glance at Han Li and spoke coldly. What sort of pill formulas does your esteemed self want? We possess 8 pill formulas, but only 2 are useful to Foundation establishment cultivators. In addition, the prices for them are astonishingly high. It won't just cost several hundred spirit stones. When Han Li heard the tone of her voice, he smiled instead of becoming angry. So long as the pill formulas are genuine, price is of no concern. Han Li's tone was exceptionally grand. The young woman was surprised by his response and earnestly sized him up. Then please wait a moment. I will call for people to bring out the pill formulas and the set of magic tools. The young woman's expression softened. It was only natural that she acted more pleasantly around a magnanimous guest. She merely took out a small bell and lightly tapped it with a rhythm. Then, she casually sat in her chair without the slightest intention of entertaining Han Li. Han Li felt somewhat amazed at this. Still, he calmly pulled out a chair and sat across from the young woman. The only thing separating the two was a wooden table. Han Li's action caused the young woman's graceful brow to lightly crease. Although her expression wasn't very happy, she ultimately didn't say anything. A short moment later, a young female cultivator walked in, grasping two jade boxes, one large and one small. "Place them there." The young woman spoke indifferently as she pointed to the side of the table. "Yes, young madam," the female cultivator respectfully replied before placing the jade boxes down on the table. She then took the initiative to withdraw. And Lee's eyes flashed with surprise upon seeing the female cultivator speak so respectfully to a young female mortal. "The pill formulas and the magic tools are here. Your esteemed self should have a look. If they are to your satisfaction, then I will tell you the price." The young woman lightly pushed the jade boxes toward Han Li. Since she insisted, Han Li didn't act with the slightest politeness. He took the small jade box and opened the lid, revealing a red and white jade talisman. Han Li touched the two jade talismans and closed his eyes, slowly submerging his spiritual sense within them. When the young woman saw that Han Li was inspecting the pill formulas, she took out a thin, white book and started to read through it without the slightest of concern. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense and wore an expression of contemplation. One of the formulas was similar to the chi-gathering pill that Lei Wan had previously given him. It was useless to him. As for the other, it wasn't an ancient pill formula. It was for a pill called the True Essence Pill. Apart from the required age of the ingredients used, it was rather easy to refine. It was very suitable for his use. However, the cost of this pill formula was unexpectedly several times greater than the chi-gathering pill formula. Even Han Li understood the difference in value between ancient formulas and ordinary formulas that were currently used in the cultivation world. With that thought, Han Li returned the jade slips to their boxes with an indifferent expression. Then he took the larger box and opened it. The magic tools in the box caused Han Li to become stunned from a single glance. The jade box actually contained a set of 13 fine needles sparkling with red light. Each of the needles were only about an inch long, but their fire-red bodies emitted a fluctuating glow. Flying needle magic tools. Han Li couldn't help but mutter in astonishment. Even with Han Li's vast experience with magic tools, this was the first time he had seen flying needle magic tools such as these. He suddenly grew very excited. He previously hadn't seen anyone make full use of them either. When the young woman heard Han Li's murmurs, she couldn't help but turn her head to look at him with a trace of displeasure. She then continued to read the book without paying him any further attention. At that moment, Han Li was carefully examining one of the red needles as he held it in a pinch, without paying any attention to the young woman's displeasure. Naturally, he was aware of her displeasure, but he wasn't about to accommodate her aloof, arrogant attitude. He was now staring at the needle with squinted eyes and a serious expression. Although Han Li hadn't seen any needle-type magic tools previously, he had heard many rumors with regards to the stealthy viciousness of flying needles. He had heard that while their offensive power were slightly inferior to ordinary magic tools, their bodies were small and their flight was quick, thereby being the most suitable weapon to launch an ambush with. As such, many cultivators praised the flying needles to be a hidden weapon, causing flying needles to possess quite the reputation in the cultivation world. Naturally, there were many reasons as to why flying needle magic tools were so thin. Not only were they refined using peculiar materials, they were also several times more difficult to refine. Because of this, they were rarely seen in the cultivation world. In addition, users of flying needles would often only use them as a last resort since they were unwilling to allow others to know of their existence. This was why Han Li received such a shock when he saw a set of 13 such magic tools unexpectedly appear before him. "Young miss, does this set of flying needles have a name?" Han Li felt very pleasantly surprised, but his expression remained calm when he asked the young woman. When the young woman heard Han Li, she put down the book and indifferently said, "The red thread shadow chaser needles." "Good, I wish to acquire the True Essence pill along with the set of flying needles." Han Li spoke without the slightest hesitation. The young woman revealed a strange expression as she asked with disbelief, "Yeah, you truly want that set of magic tools? What is it? Does this set of magic tools have some sort of defect, or is your esteemed pavilion unwilling to sell it?" Han Li raised his eyebrows in dissatisfaction. "Your esteemed self is mistaken. Although the red thread shadow chaser needles are extremely precious, our Stardust Pavilion does not wish to keep it. I merely ask this because there is something I must first tell you. This set of flying needles is substantially different from ordinary sets of magic tools. There is no origin controller, nor any childmother pieces. If you wish to activate them, you must simultaneously control all 13 needles. Otherwise, they would be useless. The young woman's eyes and tone were both ice cold. I must simultaneously control them. Han Li came to a suddenly realization. It was no wonder that these rare flying needles had yet to be purchased. It held such a high requirement for one's spiritual sense. The young woman continued without the slightest of humor. That's right. Originally, Aunt Lan and a few others fancied this set of magic tools, but because they were only able to control up to 9 needles, they have given up on it. So, all 13 needles then. Han Li chuckled before suddenly raising his hand, beckoning to the rest of the needles in the box. With a flash of red light, all of the flying needles simultaneously floated. The red needles quickly revolved around Han Li, transforming into 13 red threads that were difficult for the naked eye to see, creating a finely woven red net in an instant. The young woman's small mouth gaped, revealing an appearance of surprise to Han Li for the first time. Han Li soon waved his hand once more, returning the red threads to the jade box, which once again revealed their original appearance as needles. With an unchanged expression, Han Li asked with a deep voice, "Am I able to purchase these magic tools now?" "Since your esteemed self is able to use them, of course you can. Together with the true essence pill formula, it will come to a total of 4,000 spirit stones." The young woman regained her calm and once again spoke without the slightest humor. 4,000 spirit stones. Han Li looked at the young woman while rubbing his nose. That price had exceeded his expectations. The pill formula is 1,500 spirit stones. The flying needles are 2,500. The young woman listed the price without the slightest hesitation. To tell the truth, the woman didn't see the 4,000 spirit stones as overly expensive. After all, these items were rarely seen within the cultivation world. Were it not for the defeat of the 3 allied countries against the Devil Dao, they would have never sold such valuable items. At that moment, Han Li suddenly took a seat and assumed a solemn expression. "At what price does your esteemed pavilion purchase 1,000-year-old spiritual medicine?" Chapter 356. Disaster and Fortune Come Hand in Hand. Han Li calmly walked out from the Stardust Pavilion a quarter hour later. He turned his head to look at the huge pavilion with a faint, mysterious smile on his face, before continuing on with long strides. Han Li currently had the red thread shadow chaser needles, and a jade slip containing the true essence pill formula inside his storage pouch. Moments ago, he had casually asked about the selling price of 1,000-year-old spiritual medicine. Instead of taking out any herbs, he took out 2 boxes each containing a face-setting pill, created from 1,000-year-old herbs, and handed it over to the young woman. Han Li vividly remembered the fervent expression of the usually aloof woman when he told her about the face-setting pill's miraculous effect of an unchanging appearance. The sharp contrast with her usual expression had surprised him by no small measure. Soon after, the young woman called over a pill refinement expert from the Stardust Pavilion to personally confirm the claims. However, none of them had refined such a pill before. In the end, she brought the 2 medicine pills to the 5th floor's Madame Lan to verify the legitimacy of the face-setting pills, as well as their miraculous effect of preserving one's appearance. After a whispered discussion, the women decided that Han Li could pay for the pill formula, and the magic tools set with the 2 face-setting pills along with 1,000 spirit stones. Now that he thought about it, he felt it was quite funny. Being able to eternally preserve one's appearance was a matter that proved extremely enticing and irresistible to women. Even such a clever schemer with such deep cultivation as Madame Lan revealed the same fervent expression as the young woman upon hearing Han Li say the words, face-setting pill. As a result, Han Li came to a complete understanding about how greatly women cared about their appearance. However, the amount that Han Li had acquired for the face-setting pill had far exceeded his estimations. He had originally believed that the pills would get him 2,000 spirit stones at most. Therefore, their offer had left Han Li completely satisfied. Naturally, he didn't attempt to haggle over the price and ignore their generous offer. It was quite fortunate that the 2 shopkeepers were women. Were it a male shopkeeper, he would have been quite lucky to get a few hundred spirit stones for them. After he finished the trade, Madame Lan couldn't help but ask about the medicine pill's origin after recovering from her earlier fervor. Han Li thoughtlessly replied, "It was an unintentional discovery," before making himself scarce. As Han Li walked out of the Stardust Pavilion, he felt some reluctance. He knew that since the Stardust Pavilion was able to take out such rarities as pill formulas and the red thread shadow chaser needles. They were certain to have even more precious items. It was a pity that he wasn't able to take out more medicine pills and spiritual herbs for trade, as Han Li clearly understood the dangers of openly revealing one's wealth. With regret lingering in his heart, Han Li found an inn that accommodated cultivators and decided to stay there. For the remainder of the day, Han Li started to meditate and refine qi, preparing for the next day when he would have store owner Su refine his magic tools. On the morning of the second day, Han Li arrived at the tool refinement store in accordance with the appointed time. Store owner Su had been waiting for him for quite a while. Once he saw Han Li, he immediately called out to him in excitement, urging him to enter the rear courtyard. Han Li gave a slight smile and entered. Half a month later, Han Li finally emerged from the store. But this time, he appeared to be the opposite of how he entered and wore a darkened expression, as if he were in an exceptionally foul mood. Store owner Su closely followed behind him with a face full of shame. He was muttering something to Han Li as he followed him. Han Li then released a long and heavy sigh, which somewhat alleviated his foul mood. Soon after, he spoke to store owner Su in an amiable tone before slowly walking out of the market city, leaving behind the old man in a daze. A short while later, Han Li had left the territory of the market city and flew toward Xin Ryan's small, nameless mountain. While Han Li stood on the divine wind boat, his expression became sullen once more as he thought of the repeated tool refinement failures in the past half-month. He had overestimated the tool refinement technique of that shop owner Su, resulting in the almost complete destruction of those precious materials just to make one magic tool set. As for the mantis materials that he had valued the greatest, they had been entirely lost in the refining process. Han Li became extremely regretful after the fact, and felt an urge to ruthlessly strike down shop owner Su. But in the end, when he saw the old man's great display of shame, he decided to let the matter drop. Even when he departed, he had consoled the old man in an amiable manner. Sighing from what had happened, Han Li patted his storage pouch. 5 white, flawless flying knives flew out from the storage pouch and continuously spiraled around Han Li. After seeing the 5 knives magic tool set that was refined from the white spider's legs, Han Li's mood improved slightly. Not only were 3 of the legs destroyed, but the white spider's shell that he intended to refine into armor had also been lost. But what he truly hadn't expected was that the entirety of the huge mantis materials would be completely wasted. This could be considered a great misfortune born from great fortune. Han Li could only think about this with a bitter smile. But this experience taught Han Li that the rarer and more superior the materials, the greater the skill that was required to refine them into magic tools. Even the same person who had refined the Inky Flood Dragon's materials with great success was not enough. During his flight, Han Li appeared to have entered deep contemplation. Several days later, he had once again arrived above a small, nameless mountain. This time, Han Li didn't need to use a voice transmission talisman. The formation spell had automatically opened a passage for Han Li. Han Li smiled. It seemed that Xin Ryan had been waiting for his return. After all, the agreed date had nearly arrived. After a short moment, Han Li was sitting down in a chair in a bamboo room. Wearing plain clothes, Xin Ryan sat across from him with a smile. Xin Ryan took out a jade slip and handed it to Han Li. With a gentle expression, she said, "Senior Han, your arrival is quite timely. Yesterday, I just finished restoring the ancient transportation formation. So long as Senior restores the formation in accordance with the design, the ancient transportation formation will be functional." From her point of view, restoring the ancient transportation formation proved to be quite challenging, and she was quite happy with her recent success. Han Li reached out for the jade talisman. He was extremely happy and had even revealed a rarely seen undisguised smile. Although he didn't intend to immediately make use of the transportation formation, it was bound to be a good backup plan. Han Li submerged his spiritual sense into the jade slip to take a look. As he expected, he saw detailed and complete instructions on the ancient formation's restoration. "Thank you for your trouble, young lady Xin." Han Li didn't drag his thanks into a long-winded speech. Instead, he sincerely said a few words of thanks and carefully put the jade slip away. "It was nothing. I personally held much interest in this ancient transportation formation," Xin Ryan replied with a faint smile. Soon after, she thought of something and took out a small, exquisite storage pouch and handed it over to Han Li. She unhurriedly spoke, "I only have another year or 2 to live at most. These are sets of formation flags and plates that elder brother Qi and I refined together. Since I won't be able to use them, I'll give them to Senior Han as a present. I hope it proves useful in assisting Senior Han with his future cultivation." Seeing that Xin Ryan had given such an impressive gift with such light words, Han Li was left stunned. At that point, he took a deep look at her. After a short moment of silence, he took the storage pouch into his hands and solemnly said, "Although I, Han Li, am not an honorable, kind-hearted, or chivalrous hero, I will promise Xin Ryan once more that as long as I have the strength, I will thoroughly extinguish the Fu clan from the cultivation world without doubt." Xin Ryan smiled in response. The purpose of her large gift had been achieved. The more reluctant someone was to make a pledge, the more sincerely they would attempt to uphold it. If Senior doesn't have any pressing matters, he can stay at my humble abode for a few days. I do hope to have a chat with Senior Han about the Tao of Formation spells. 3 days later, Han Li left the Nameless Mountain on his Divine Wind boat and arrived at White Pond Mountain, a nearby gathering place for cultivators. Rogue cultivators and cultivator clan members would often gather here to exchange information of the cultivation world and conduct trade as well. Han Li came in order to hear how much the situation had deteriorated in the state of UA, and whether or not the 7 sects were able to make a turnaround. Only after acquiring this information would Han Li be able to decide on his next plan of action. The day of the next cultivator gathering had nearly arrived. White Pond Mountain wasn't far from Xin Ryan's Nameless Mountain, and she and Xianxia had previously went there several times. Naturally, a small meeting such as this would mostly have Qi condensation cultivators. Only rarely would Foundation establishment cultivators appear here. 1 day later, Han Li arrived at the base of the so-called White Pond Mountain. This mountain was quite large and had 3 peaks. The tallest and most rugged location, the West Peak, was where the meeting would be hosted. Han Li turned into a streak of white light as he shot toward the mountain peak. Chapter 357, White Pond Mountain. The west peak of White Pond Mountain was slightly larger than Han Li had imagined. Not only was there an ancient Buddhist temple on the mountain peak, there were also more than 10 stone kiosks of varying sizes, each with a group of several cultivators chatting around them. Naturally, there were a few straggling cultivators that wandered about the kiosks and the temple. It seemed that they were those who had impatiently arrived early for the White Pond Mountains meeting. Han Li observed the mountain peak from the air for a moment before spiraling down and landing in an obscure corner. Soon after, Han Li walked to the nearby stone kiosks with Crooked Soul in tow. Because of Han Li's powerful spiritual sense, he was soon able to clearly hear the whispered discussions of the cultivators within the kiosks. One of the whispered conversations in particular captured Han Li's attention. Han Li focused on this 4-person conversation and discovered that they were talking about the war situation between the 7 sects of UA and the Devil Tao. His interest was roused, and he walked over without further hesitation. This was a great victory for the Devil Tao. Not only were the 6 sects of the state of UA forced to flee from their homeland, catastrophe will also befall the state of Zijin and our very own state of Yuanwu. A pale middle-aged man sighed deeply after speaking. That's right. In the last great battle, the 6 sects' power had suffered great losses. The 2 countries that had fought alongside them also lost 60% of their forces as well. The Heavenly Star Sect and the other sects are now facing great pressure. A youth about 20 years old spoke with schadenfreude. Among the other 3 in the discussion, 2 old men had unchanged expressions and didn't reply. As for the middle-aged man who had just spoken, he couldn't help but bitterly laugh, wanting to say something in response. But at that moment, he was interrupted by someone's voice from the side. While it is true that the Heavenly Star Sect finds itself in a dilemma along with the other great sects, the lives of us rogue cultivators and those from cultivator clans will also soon take a turn for the worse. Those of the Devil Tao espouse the belief that the strong should feed on the weak. When that time comes, we definitely won't be able to enjoy free and easygoing lives. Han Li slowly walked in and spoke the words that the middle-aged man intended to say. When the 4 realized that an outsider was nearby, they were startled and immediately grew silent. But when they were unable to perceive Han Li's cultivation, they all revealed a trace of worry and respectfully saluted Han Li. The middle-aged man then hurriedly rushed to exonerate the youth. "Senior, my honorable nephew spoke without thinking. He doesn't hold the slightest disrespect toward the sects. I hope Senior won't take offense." These people had unexpectedly presumed Han Li to be a high-grade cultivator from the state of Yuanwu's cultivation clans. The youth who had just spoken appeared especially nervous. He, fellow Taoists are mistaken. I am but a rogue cultivator. I was only casually adding on to the conversation. Han Li smiled and warmly explained. The four relaxed upon hearing Han Li's words. Although they didn't know whether Han Li was truly a rogue cultivator, they clearly understood he wouldn't be pursuing the rash words that had been previously spoken. Thus, they gave Han Li a respectful welcome. Han Li then took a seat next to the stone table within the kiosk. Us juniors are truly honored to have Senior here. However, why would Senior partake in such a lowly exchange of this degree? An old man with a red-flushed face cautiously asked. It was obvious why this man was amazed. A small meeting place like White Pond Mountain would normally find it difficult to attract Foundation establishment cultivators. If such high-grade cultivators wanted to converse, they would normally seek out a higher-class gathering spot. First was due to time, as I came here from a desolate mountain where I was cultivating. Recently, I've heard news that the cultivators from my country, the state of UA, had suffered a huge loss. I felt that the cultivation world was about to undergo great changes, so I thought I'd discreetly look for information. Do you fellow Taoists have the latest information on the Devil Tao and the state of UA? Han Li gave a simplified explanation. The four looked at each other for a moment before three of them focused their attention on the shriveled old man among them. The most well-informed is naturally our eldest brother Ding. After all, the Ding clan possesses many secular properties in the state of UA, the red-faced old man quickly said. The other two simultaneously agreed, causing Han Li's eyes to flash with a queer expression. Old man Ding expressed some embarrassment in response. He helplessly said, "Our Ding clan members in the state of UA have indeed given us information on recent circumstances. Of course, the clan doesn't wish for this information to spread, but since you are all my close friends and this senior also wishes to know, I can talk about it. However, I hope you all won't easily make this information known." The other three couldn't help but grow excited and repeatedly praise him. Even Han Li gently nodded his head. The old man lightly sighed and slowly spoke. "I've just received this information a few days ago. Currently, the state of UA is in great turmoil. Although the Devil Tao had defeated the Six Sects' allied armies, a large amount of the Six Sects cultivators have broken off from their retreat out of the state of UA and have been incessantly launching guerrilla raids utilizing their familiarity of the terrain. I've heard that there were also a few core formation cultivators who haven't retreated, thus keeping the Devil Tao busy. After all, core formation cultivators aren't so easily dealt with. In addition, as the Six Sects have existed in the state of UA for so many years, they possessed a lot of hidden power and have been causing the Devil Tao's takeover of the state of UA to be rather troublesome. As for the state of UA's cultivation clans, they have divided into three factions. One faction turned traitor once the Six Sects were defeated. They took the initiative to surrender and pay allegiance to the Devil Tao. Another faction consisted of those that were too closely tied with the Six Sects. Fearing that the Devil Tao would want to take revenge, they fled the state of UA as the Six Sects had. As for the last faction, they are waiting to see how things will develop before taking action. As for the Six Sects' long-established key locations, those from the Masked Moon Sect and Giant Sword Sect have yet to be broken through by the Devil Tao. The other four sects have been completely broken through, but it was said that very little had been obtained from the attacks. A majority of the rare items had already been removed by the Six Sects' disciples. The way I see it, every day the Devil Tao is able to pacify the state of UA is another day where the state of Yuanwu or Zijin isn't attacked. After all, their numbers are great, and they were able to simultaneously take down two small countries and a mid-ranked country in one fell swoop. Since it is only a matter of time before they will fall upon us, they have no problem dealing with the disruptive Six Sect cultivators for the time being. The old man's slowly spoken words had revealed his own take on the matter. The red-faced old man couldn't help but interrupt and ask, "Eldest brother Ding, why do you think that the Devil Tao has given us time to breathe, allowing for our country's sects to prepare for their attack?" This is hard to say. After all, I am only aware of the surface information. As for the absolute truth of the matter, I'm afraid that only the highest echelons of the sects know. Old man Ding slowly shook his head and stole a glance at Han Li. It was obvious that he believed Han Li to be a cultivator from a sect of his own country, and had refrained from speaking of certain matters. Old man Ding didn't wish to continue speaking of that issue, and suddenly said something with a smile that left Han Li shocked instead. Because the Six Sects of the state of UA wished for a hasty retreat, they used the strategy of cutting off their own tail. They only brought along their talented elite disciples, while leaving behind the rest of their many disciples as ignorant sacrifices. It is said that the ones who most effectively applied this cruel tactic were the highest echelons of Yellow Maple Valley's disciples. They had their trusted elite make a smooth escape from the state of UA while sacrificing two whole groups of disciples, nearly all of their cultivators apart from those that escaped. Tusk. Their methods are truly impressive. Although the old man said this indifferently, Han Li's heart suddenly sunk, and his face became faintly twisted. But fortunately, the others didn't dare to stare at Han Li for long, so none of them noticed this change. Strongly suppressing his astonishment, Han Li calmly asked, "Fellow Taoist Ding, you said that Yellow Maple Valley sacrificed two batches of disciples. How did this happen? I'm quite interested." Since Senior is asking, Junior will naturally answer truthfully. I heard that when the upper echelon of the state of UA received the news of their frontline's defeat, Yellow Maple Valley immediately plotted to make a crafty escape. They would first have a group of disciples rush to evacuate, but secretly divulge this information to the spies of the Devil Dao, claiming that the group contained their elite disciples. This group would also bring along a large amount of spirit stones and materials, completely attracting the attention of the Devil Dao soldiers. At the same time, they left behind another group of ignorant disciples and had them use the Great Formation to confront the Devil Dao. With these two groups drawing the enemy's full attention, Yellow Maple Valley's highest echelon then had the true trusted elite disciples retreat in the opposite direction with the sect's 1,000 years worth of savings. I heard that, although the number of people to safely retreat from Yellow Maple Valley was the fewest, they had the smoothest retreat. As for the other 5 sects, although they retreated en masse, they encountered repeated attacks and had to fight for their lives on many occasions. Much of their valuables have fallen into the Devil Dao's hands as a result. This matter then became widely spread throughout the state of UA by the Devil Dao. Not daring to slight Han Li, the old man gave him a complete explanation. Han Li's expression remained unchanged as he spoke unhurriedly with a soft voice. "Oh, so it was like that. Those abandoned Yellow Maple Valley disciples sure were foolish." Chapter 358, The Endless Sea, the Mulan. Han Li then suddenly spoke with a gentle smile. "Well then, knowing that the state of UA is currently in turmoil is enough for me." These incomprehensible words left the four with a feeling of profound mystery. They could only force themselves to give him a smile in return. Han Li stood up and said amiably, "You can all go ahead and continue chatting. I am going to go to a different room." "As you please, Senior." "Best wishes, Senior." The four hastily saw off Han Li with respect. Han Li casually beckoned with his arm and called out to Crooked Soul, who had stood outside throughout the conversation. They then walked together to another stone kiosk. 4 hours later, Han Li stood at a corner of the mountain peak and lowered his head in contemplation. He had participated in many discussions about the current affairs of the state of UA. As a result, he had come to the conclusion that the current situation in the state of UA could only be described as chaotic. Under these circumstances, he only had 2 options. One was to use a flying magic tool and fly to a country far away from the state of UA in order to find a place suitable for cultivation. The other option was to restore the ancient transportation formation and take a gamble to see where the transportation formation would take him. After all, this precious ancient transportation formation was built underground for a reason. It was certain to be linked to a distant location. At first glance, he felt that he should obviously choose the first option as it was more reliable. But after some consideration, Han Li felt that it was just as risky. To the east and west of the state of UA were the Devil Dao's state of Tianluo and the Righteous Dao Alliance's state of Fengdu. As a result, he would only be able to head north or south. If he were to flee north of Yuanwu, there would be several tens of small and mid-ranked countries, but Han Li knew that their cultivators wouldn't be able to resist the attacks of either the Devil or Righteous Dao. Some of them had even attached themselves to the 2 great powers, becoming their puppets and occasionally engaging in both open and covert struggles with the other side. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for the state of Tianluo and Fengdu to conduct a wide-scale turf war, especially since they originally only had a small stretch of common border with one other. Those countries would soon be turned into battlefields by the Devil Dao and Righteous Dao Alliance, and Han Li naturally wouldn't be able to stay there. But if he were to brave the dangers of traveling through these countries and continue north, he would arrive at the Heavenly South region's northmost area, the Endless Seas, where few cultivators dared to travel. Not only was this sea extremely dark, It was also limitless and had many rare species of fishes living within. The fishes were extremely violent and were no less vicious than their high-grade demon beast counterparts on land. Even core formation cultivators would find themselves in extreme danger if they fell into the sea. The thought of flying across the sea was but a mere fantasy. There was once a nascent soul cultivator who was curious about the end of the sea. After preparing fully, he then flew over the ocean water. After flying for over a year, he was still unable to see any end of the sea and hadn't seen the slightest hint of land. At that point, over half of his medicine pills and spirit stones had been exhausted, and he could only resentfully turn back. Otherwise, he would only be able to die at sea when he ran out of spiritual power, even if he was a nascent soul cultivator. Naturally, Han Li wouldn't indulge himself in the fantasy of crossing the sea. His only thoughts were to head down south. South of the state of Yue, after passing through the state of Zijin and then another 6 countries, one would arrive at the 9 Nations Union, an inseparably close alliance of 9 countries of various sizes. This alliance between the 9 countries was formed mostly for the purpose of combating their fearsome invaders, the Mulan race's spell soldiers. When speaking of the Mulan race and their magic soldiers, one wouldn't be able to avoid mentioning the Mulan prairies, home of the Mulan tribes and a close neighbor of the 9 Nations Union. The Mulan race were completely different from the Yan people of the states of Yuanwu and Yue. Their people were completely nomadic, possessing a culture of fearlessness and a love for brandishing their sabers and spears. The Mulan race were made up of countless tribes of various sizes, where small tribes would consist of several 100,000 people, and the large tribes would number several tens of millions. Cultivators also existed within these tribes, but they were called spell warriors instead of cultivators. It is said that they are indistinguishable from common cultivators, and the divisions of cultivation as well as the cultivation techniques are extremely similar. The only thing that differed were that the spell warriors of core formation rank and higher didn't care much about external items such as magic tools and talismans. Instead, they were focused on mastering their elemental Taoist magics to perfection. They even had secret earthborn techniques where they merged with the prairie. Their research had produced a variety of extremely strange and formidable magic techniques, and in turn created a new school of magic techniques that distinguished the Mulan, which they called spirit techniques. By relying on these incisive, spirit techniques, the Mulan race's spell warriors were able to contend and even gain the upper hand against cultivators of equivalent rank. As the Mulan race's spell warriors grew increasingly numerous, their need for spirit vein locations and spirit stones intensified to the point of significantly worsening the depletion of cultivation resources. This shortage was further exacerbated by the extreme lack of natural cultivation resources in the Mulan prairie. As a result, the Mulan race's spell warriors had their gazes set upon the abundant spiritual qi and resources of the 9 countries for as long as anybody could remember. They had often launched attacks against these countries in order to seize their spirit veins, spirit stone mines, and other such resources vital to cultivators. Naturally, the cultivation world of the 9 countries were unwilling to allow their resources to be seized by these savage cultivators. In the end, a bloody war of magic had erupted. In the beginning, the 9 countries had individually resisted, but they had quickly suffered defeat at the hands of the united armies of the Mulan tribes, surrendering a large portion of their resources and land. Having now experienced the ferociousness of the Mulan, they learned from their defeat and hastily formed the 9 Nations Union. By using underhanded and deplorable methods, they were able to gradually defeat the Mulan race's spell warriors and retake their land. But having just tasted victory, the Mulan tribes were naturally unwilling to simply give up. After endless years of strife and warfare, mutual hatred had bloomed within both sides. The death toll had grown to such a degree that even the mortals of Mulan and Yan had been influenced. As of now, the people of Mulan didn't dare to set foot within the borders of the 9 countries. Likewise, those of Yan didn't dare to travel too deeply into the Mulan prairies. As for how many people there are in the Mulan tribes, nobody truly knows. The Mulan prairie was far too large, and the 9 Nations Union had only tangled with a small portion of the Mulan tribes. Although the Mulan prairie wasn't endless like the Black Devil Sea, it was said to require 5 years for someone to travel from one end of the prairie to the other end. Furthermore, Mulan prairies was just a name given by the Mulan tribes. At the other end of the prairie lay the Mulan tribe's true enemy, the Soaring tribes. The Soaring tribes were another nomadic tribe, who called these grasslands the heaven-tide prairies. This was due to their long-held beliefs in their patron god, the heaven-tide beast. There was no reason for two nomadic tribes to live on the same prairie, and the two ethnicities had formed a relationship of fatal enmity. It was unknown for how long their soldiers and cultivators had been fighting one another. In any case, a huge battle was certain to take place every 100 years or so at the center of the prairie. 10 million mortal soldiers would fight, while tens of thousands of cultivators battled throughout the sky. Naturally, the ultimate victor would be decided by the battle in the sky. Han Li had learned all of this from rumors and ancient records of all kinds. It was said that at the other end of the Mulan Prairie existed an incredibly huge great empire. The entire heavenly south region wasn't even as large as a tenth of it. Han Li found those rumors hard to believe and had difficulty imagining a country that was over 10 times larger than the entire heavenly south region. Of course, all this had nothing to do with Han Li's current plans. They were just random thoughts that had rushed through his mind. After he set aside his wandering thoughts, he eventually came to the conclusion that the 6 sects evacuation wouldn't end within the nearby countries. They would definitely make a detour to the 9 Nations Union. After all, the cultivators of the 9 countries had battles with the Mulan spell warriors every other year and a war every 10 years. They would definitely welcome the 6 sects and provide them with great assistance. Naturally, the spirit veins and other such locations of value allocated to them would depend on their abilities. If Han Li were to return to Yellow Maple Valley, he would just continue to be cannon fodder. This meant he definitely couldn't head south. Although he had already come to a clear answer on what he should do, he received a great headache once he thought about it again. First, he would see whether or not he could restore the transportation formation. If he managed to successfully repair it, he would then reconsider whether or not he would use it. At best, I could return if I'm dissatisfied. At worst, well, this option did hold a certain degree of danger after all, Han Li thought with a bitter smile. Chapter 359, A Surprising Encounter with an Acquaintance. Having come to decision, Han Li silently flew off the mountain. Later on, when the White Pond Mountains meeting convened, those chi condensation cultivators that had spoken with Han Li would be left baffled by his absence. Han Li first went to the Heavenly Star Sect's Market City to purchase the list of items that he would need to restore the ancient transportation formation. Then, he hurried off to the state of Yue. This time, Han Li didn't take the direct route to enter the state of Yue. Instead, he circled around to a remote part of the border between the state of Yuanwu and Yue and stealthily entered through there. Now that the state of Yue belonged to the Devil Dao, he took steps to avoid entering dangerous territories to prevent having enemies pursuing him the entire way. But Han Li didn't know that because of this precaution, he had unexpectedly avoided a crisis. Currently, the majority of the state of Yue's borders were heavily patrolled. If Han Li had recklessly returned using his original path, he would have been unable to escape their attention, most likely leading to an unavoidable pursuit and battle. Having safely entered the state of Yue, Han Li hastily journeyed on routes through the most desolate areas he could find, allowing him to arrive at the Spirit Stone Mine near the transportation formation unnoticed. Han Li stealthily observed the Spirit Stone Mine from far away, as it had now fallen into the hands of the Devil Dao. He saw Devil Dao disciples wearing green and white clothing with either a dark green ghost skull or a pink peach blossom tucked within the corners of their sleeves. It seemed they were cultivators from the Ghost Spirit Sect and the Harmonious Bond Sect. Now knowing that the Spirit Stone Mine was being guarded, Han Li stealthily slipped away and entered a nearby secret underground entrance. He was able to easily find the concealed cave he had previously collapsed. After using his magic tools to tear the stone away, Han Li was able to take another look at the damaged ancient transportation formation. He let out a sigh of relief upon seeing the ancient transportation formation safe and sound. During the following day, Han Li first used his newly acquired illusion formation flags to thoroughly conceal the secret location. Afterwards, he laid down the formation flags and formation plates of the 5 elements reversal formation, laying out a thorough defense for the cave containing the ancient transportation formation. This way, he would have enough time to easily escape, even if he was discovered by the Devil Dao cultivators. Freed from worry, Han Li started the transportation formation's restoration. The Jade Talisman clearly stated that restoring the ancient transportation formation required the utmost precision. Even the slightest slant of an unremarkable talisman line could result in an error in the transportation formation. After spending an entire 7 days, Han Li had only managed to complete less than half of the restoration. But that night, Han Li encountered a huge problem. He had already ran out of the supplies he had bought earlier. Han Li was flabbergasted. He had originally bought a bit more than what was mentioned on the item list, but he hadn't accounted for the wasted materials from the mistakes he would make while repairing the formation. He was neither a tool refinement nor a formation spell master. As he was lacking in skill, he had wasted over half of his materials from errors and didn't have enough left to finish. Han Li sighed. It seemed he'd have to go on another trip. However, he remembered that a small market town of some cultivator clan lay several days east of the Spirit Stone mine. Although it wasn't large, items such as source iron and crystal jade could be found there. Since the core of the transportation formation wasn't ruined, he would only require a few common materials to repair it. His only worry was that given the current chaos of the cultivation world, this clan's market city might no longer exist. If this were the case, he'd have to travel to a more dangerous area. Under the cover of night, Han Li flew out of the cave and headed directly toward the market city. He had already decided that if the market city no longer existed, it would be best to return to the state of Yuanwu. He couldn't afford to just ignore the fact that the ancient formation was only half repaired. To be safe, Han Li planned to only travel during the night. During the day, he would find areas to rest and recover, keeping the danger to a minimum. In this way, Han Li continued to fly east under the cover of night. Whenever rays of sunlight began to appear off the horizon, he would search for a place to rest. But while he was gazing down from above, his expression suddenly changed, and he quickly turned his head in another direction. Han Li faintly felt as if someone was quickly flying toward him and that they weren't alone. Han Li reacted instantly by stomping on his divine wind boat and flew downward. In the blink of an eye, he had disappeared into the darkness of night. Just as he concealed himself and restrained his spiritual chi, a blinding light silently flashed by him like a bolt of lightning. Then a bloody cloud about 10 meters wide relentlessly chased after it, releasing unending ghostly wails and howls as it flew past. A bit behind the cloud was a pink ray of light that released soft, clear cries which seemed to also be in relentless pursuit. Han Li, who was hidden in the mountain forest below, didn't pay attention to the white light, focusing on the bloody cloud instead. He felt that the bloody cloud seemed extremely familiar. Wasn't that the demonic art which had protected the young master of the Ghost Spirit Sect? Having remembered the Ghost Spirit Sect's young master's ferociousness and the hardships he had been put through, Han Li's expression became gloomy. While Han Li was still in thought, those in the sky had hastily descended, and the white light in front suddenly stopped. The brilliant light then quickly faded away, revealing a white-clothed woman standing on a flying sword. This woman had a slender body and was wearing a cloak. As soon as she appeared, she coldly spoke to her pursuers. "Juniors, it appears you are unwilling to let me go. Could it be that you have a death wish?" The woman's voice was cold and beautiful. When Han Li heard it, he nearly jumped in surprise. Greatly shocked, Han Li thought to himself, Is this Fairy Nangong's voice? Is it really her? Although he had barely spoken with this woman, after he had slept with her, she had become the most important woman in Han Li's life. The memory of her had always remained clear in his heart. Also, while the voice sounded very much like Nangong Wan, its hoarseness left him slightly doubtful. While Han Li was lost in astonishment, the bloody mist and that pink light had both stopped about 40 meters away in response to her threats. The bloody and pink lights then faded away, revealing the people inside. The bloody cloud revealed the Ghost Spirit Sect's young master Wang Chan as expected, and the pink light revealed a man and woman that left Han Li dumbstruck. He had last seen both at Yanling Castle. One was a demonic man as beautiful as a woman. As for the woman, she had been missing for a long time and was assumed to have fallen into the grasp of the devil Dao, Dong Chuaner One. Martial Aunt Hong Fu is her great-aunt. She appears in Chapter 244 and is with Han Li throughout the Yan clan castle's arc. Dong Chuaner wore a cold expression and appeared rather dignified. Her originally seductive appearance had completely disappeared at some point in the past. But what surprised Han Li more was that she had already cultivated to mid-foundation establishment from early foundation establishment. When Han Li saw Dong Chuaner standing by the demonic man's side, he couldn't help but tightly crease his brow. At the moment, the Ghost Spirit Sect's young master and the gorgeous man were coldly staring at the masked woman and revealed a trace of hesitation. Although Fairy Nangong had already fought with a Ghost Spirit Sect core formation expert and should be lacking in power, She had killed countless Devil Daocore formation cultivators while fighting for the masked moon sect before. It wouldn't be worth it if she were to go all out and end them all in mutual destruction. With that in mind, the two couldn't help but look at each other, neither willing to act first. That strange, gorgeous man gazed at the masked woman with a slight smile. If this were the past, both Senior Brother Wang and I would naturally flee at the mere sight of Fairy Nangong. But now, even if I wanted to let you go in consideration of the previous relationship between the masked moon sect and the harmonious bond sect, my Senior Brother Wang from the ghost spirit sect would still be unwilling to let the matter go. The gorgeous man spoke as if they were all on extremely familiar terms with one another, and as if this were a matter they had already discussed, but he unapologetically pushed the ghost spirit sect's young master in front of him to act as a shield. When Wang Chan heard this, he grew furious. He wasn't someone who showed emotion. He only coldly glanced at her before speaking calmly. I heard that the harmonious bond sect has a secret technique, the art of dark moon yin absorption. A male cultivator can use it to forcefully absorb a portion of a woman's origin yin through pair cultivation techniques. Although it doesn't absorb much, with Senior's core formation cultivation, it will be enough for this young Master Tian to break through his current bottleneck and reach late foundation establishment. But the gorgeous man's expression paled slightly. He hadn't expected that his reason for bitterly pursuing this woman without end had been seen through by Wang Chan. He couldn't help but feel angered from the humiliation. At that moment the masked woman shot them a resentful glare. She gritted her perfect teeth and spat out, "You're all as bad as each other. Die." She raised her hand, and an earth-shattering white mist of swordlight shot toward them. When Wang Chen and the gorgeous man saw this, they both turned pale from fright. The next instant, they had turned into a bloody cloud and a ray of light, respectively, in an attempt to hastily evade the attack. Chapter 360, Halfway to Calamity. Dong Chuaner, who was standing by the side of the gorgeous man, was also enveloped by the man's rainbow barrier. In an instant, the three had hastily flown back. A spiteful strike from a core formation cultivator was not something the three of them could endure. The swordlight filled the sky and closely pursued them for about 40 meters before suddenly vanishing without a trace. At the same time, the woman's slender body swayed as if she were about to fall. The ghost spirit sect's young master and the gorgeous man grew elated upon seeing this and turned their retreat into a charge. As Han Li watched on from below, his face stiffened and he subconsciously patted his storage pouch. The 13 red-line shadow chaser needles flew out and he quickly drew them back with his hands. Even if he were to put himself in danger, Han Li couldn't allow Nangong Wan to wilt before his eyes. No matter how self-centered and cold-hearted he may be, regardless of whether or not he could contend with the ghost spirit sect's young master and the others, the entirety of his heart and soul urged him to act. Just as Han Li was about to act and release the flying needles to save the masked woman, the sky abruptly underwent a massive change. The previously wavering woman that was standing on the sword suddenly regained her bearings, and her eyes glinted with cold light. Wang Chan and the gorgeous man grew pale. They immediately knew that they had fallen for her ruse, but by the time they wanted to run away, it was already too late. The woman raised her hands and countless streaks of swordlight soared through the air and completely enveloped the three in blinding white light. When Han Li saw this, he felt relieved and loosened his grip on his flying needles. The sky shone with gray light from the masked woman's swordlight. A bloody cloud and pink light tottered within it like a small boat in a surging storm. However, they still managed to painfully endure. In particular, within the pink light, the gorgeous man and Dong Chuaner released a strange azure-red light from their hands, offsetting the swordlight's attack. Han Li lightly wrinkled his brow and lowered his head in contemplation before silently disappearing. Meanwhile, the masked woman felt great worry. She was truly surprised to see that even though she had used a ruse to press the Devil Dao cultivators, her current attack was still unable to deal with the three. Not long ago, she had fought a great battle against a Devil Dao core formation cultivator. Her opponent had nearly succeeded in ending the battle in mutual destruction, depleting her magic power. Although she managed to escape further entanglements afterwards, her heavy injuries had been a cause for great concern. Even worse, her magic treasure, which was inseparably bonded to her soul, had suffered serious damage during the previous battle, leaving it unusable for the time being. Furthermore, because she was being pursued, she was forced to use a secret technique that greatly damaged her vitality to escape, forcefully drawing out a portion of her body's potential to produce a sliver of spiritual power. Although she had managed to throw off the majority of her pursuers, she hadn't expected that these three, who possessed exceptional devilish arts, would continue to pursue her relentlessly. Thus, she could only attempt to eliminate them. Otherwise, even if she were a core formation cultivator, she would be at their mercy once the effects of her secret technique subsided. The reason why she had stopped here was because her spiritual awareness had felt that there was a cultivator here. Although she didn't know who it was an undeniable fact that this person lacked the devilish aura possessed by those who use the techniques of the Devil Tao. Furthermore, this person was a mid-foundation establishment cultivator. Were he not a cultivator from a large clan, then he should be a cultivator from the other 5 allied sects. With nowhere to go and in a hopeless situation, she flew here with the intention of dragging that cultivator into this mess and possibly turning the situation for the better. But she absolutely didn't expect that this person's spiritual sense would be so strong. This person had concealed himself from far away without any intention of involving himself. As such, the masked woman could only confront the enemy alone and grit her teeth with aching resentment. But once again, a frightening development had unfolded before her. These 3 Devil Tao cultivators were extremely tenacious, and they possessed immensely powerful defensive magic tools. Even if she were to use the entirety of her remaining spiritual power, she wouldn't be able to kill them quickly. With regard to her high-grade talismans and impressive magic tools, they had been thoroughly exhausted in the battles many days earlier. Her heart sank as she felt her last remnants of magic power about to disappear. The Devil Tao cultivators that were bitterly enduring the swordlight felt its enormous suffocating pressure gradually weaken until it had completely disappeared. The 3 were stunned and immediately turned their gazes towards the masked woman. She blankly stood on top of her flying sword with dim, emotionless eyes while her body pitifully trembled. Wang Chan and the beautiful man looked at each other with feelings of pleasant surprise. But as they had just suffered from her clever ploy, they hesitated and didn't dare to act rashly. But at this moment, a streak of white light flew out from below like a bolt of lightning. In the blink of an eye, the white light had appeared in front of the masked woman. The silhouette within the white light embraced her waist before suddenly descending back down from where it came. This scene left Wang Chan and the gorgeous man bursting with anger. How could the 2 let such a rich prize be snatched out of their mouths? They reacted by immediately chasing after the white light with the full capabilities of their movement techniques. However, Dong Chuaner stood at her original location with an expression of shock. This was because that silhouette had appeared extremely familiar and caused her to unconsciously hesitate. About 40 meters below, the white light shot towards a dense forest. After it entered the forest, the light faded away to reveal an unremarkable male youth. As he tightly embraced the masked woman in one arm, he raised his head and expressionlessly looked at Wang Chan and the gorgeous man chasing after them. Although the masked woman lacked the strength to struggle from his embrace, her eyes were filled with humiliation and resentment as if she was scolding him. However, the youth paid this no mind. So it turned out to be you. It's you. Once they clearly saw the male youth's appearance, Wang Chen and the gorgeous man simultaneously yelled out. They had both recognized Han Li, whom they had each attempted to kill before. After glancing at each other in surprise, they charged toward Han Li while using their abilities to the fullest extent without any further hesitation. Wang Chan's blood cloud swelled and expanded to 40 meters wide in an instant. At the same time, its bloody scent grew much more intense, and its pressure became astonishingly stronger. The gorgeous man coldly laughed, and a jade flute suddenly appeared in his hand. With a wave, a clear whistle sounded out, transforming his rainbow streak of light into a pink peacock. As he shot toward Han Li, Wang Chan closely followed behind him, unwilling to be second. Seeing that the 2 were so aggressively chasing him, Han Li finally revealed a trace of panic. He suddenly stomped on his small boat, causing it to release a blinding white light. It lightly trembled as if it were strung on a bow. With the Devil Tao cultivators, astonishing offensive, they had already arrived in front of Han Li and blocked off his path of escape. They now clearly saw that the masked woman had given up her struggle and that her eyes were filled with despair. This caused the 2 to feel much more at ease. It seemed that the female core formation cultivator no longer had the power to resist. In that moment, Han Li's panicked expression underwent a sudden change, and he revealed a faint, strange smile. When the 2 outstanding Devil Tao cultivators saw Han Li's expression, their hearts thumped heavily. The scene before them suddenly changed as Han Li and the masked woman turned into a cool breeze as if they no longer existed. Then, two huge stones appeared in front of the Devil Dao cultivators, causing them to dodge away in alarm. They couldn't help but look around in astonishment. What they saw caused their complexions to pale. They were surrounded by some kind of forest with countless towering trees similar to stone obelisks. They had been trapped inside of an illusory formation. Wang Chan and the gorgeous man were furious. Although the might of this illusory formation wasn't great, they would have to spend a good amount of time to break through it, giving their prey more than enough time to escape. As a result, these two young masters of the Devil Dao developed a bone-deep hatred for Han Li. Senior brother Wang, let's quickly break out of this formation. Don't forget that my junior martial sister Dong is still outside. With her cultivation, she can stall them for a short while. She will give us all the time that we will need. The gorgeous man suddenly thought of something and coldly smiled. Wang Chan's face grew cheerful for a moment, but then he spoke with doubt. Ah, that's right. It seems this young master has forgotten something. That girl was once a Yellow Maple Valley disciple. Will she really block them? The gorgeous man then revealed some hesitation and replied with uncertainty. She will definitely act. After all, Dong Xuaner has a high position in my harmonious bond sect, far greater than the status of an ordinary disciple that she had within Yellow Maple Valley. Furthermore, this father, treat her quite well. Chapter 361, Mishap. As Han Li stomped on his divine wind boat with one arm wrapped around the masked woman, Dong Xuaner blocked his way while covered in pink light. Junior martial sister Dong, must you act? Han Li lightly sighed and spoke grudgingly. Her eyes coldly glinted as she glanced down at the unconscious masked woman in Han Li's embrace. Dong Xuaner expressionlessly said, Han Li, if you wish to leave, you must first pass through me. I have always been curious as to why my master Hong Fu had insisted on marrying me to you. Also, did you really expect me to allow a masked moon core formation cultivator to easily escape? Dong Xuaner's refined brow gradually frowned, and she wore a baleful expression. Once she finished, Han Li didn't reply with words regarding old affection or other such nonsense. After all, he had used formation flags to hastily trap the other two within a simple illusion formation. It wouldn't keep them trapped for long. Han Li's expression sunk and he said, since it's like this, then don't blame me for being ruthless, young lady Dong. Han Li then loudly yelled and waved his hand, releasing 2 black lights and 5 streaks of white light. In addition, a tortoise shell appeared beside him and blocked his front. Afterwards, 4 puppet beasts appeared at both his sides. With gaping mouths, they shot out light beams as thick as a bowl. He took action with the entirety of his power. He didn't have any notion of going easy on the fairer sex. Once Dong Xuaner saw Han Li's ferocious offensive, her expression underwent great change. She grit her teeth and waved her flawless hand, summoning a pink muslin cloth. Her hands then emitted a red-orange glow which combined with her muslin cloth to form a huge barrier of sparkling red light surrounding herself. Dong Xuaner was convinced that even if Han Li's attack was more overbearing, it still wouldn't be able to break through the powerful barrier created from her fire phoenix cloth and devilish arts. As Dong Xuaner was basking in confidence, Han Li's divine wind boat flashed with white light and streaked past her with a whoosh. Likewise, the magic tools that were in an overbearing attack made an immediate turn and quickly flew after Han Li. Without fighting for even a moment, Han Li had instead used his attack as a misdirection, allowing for an immediately escape. This was completely out of Dong Xuaner's expectations. She blankly stood in place before her face deeply blushed. Just as she thought to furiously pursue Han Li, the 4 puppet beasts fired light beams on her. Dong Xuaner could only wait until after the light beams faded away before hastily withdrawing her light barrier. But by that time, Han Li had already turned into a black dot in the distance and was about to disappear from sight. Naturally, Dong Xuaner was unwilling to allow Han Li's trickery succeed. By making use of her wondrous movement technique, she ignored the 4 puppet beasts and set off in hot pursuit. But a short moment later, that black dot in the sky flashed several more times and disappeared without a trace. With a furious expression, Dong Xuaner swept the vicinity without finding a single trace of Han Li. She had no choice but to give up her pursuit of them and dejectedly return. At this moment, Han Li was hiding in a loose earth mound to rest. A yellow barrier of light covered Han Li from all sides, but it didn't feel stuffy at all. It was quite fantastic. Han Li hadn't thought that this low-grade, earth-sync talisman would prove to be useful someday. It seems that keeping all the talismans he possessed on his body was a correct decision. A moment later, he felt that Dong Xuaner had left. Without leaving concealment, he carefully used his spiritual sense and confirmed that Dong Xuaner truly wasn't there before leaving the earth mound and speedily flying away. Many hours later, Han Li carried the masked woman into the dry hollow of a large tree. The tree hollow's previous master, a huge bear, was lying dismembered outside the cave. Han Li gently lowered the masked woman to the ground and gripped her flawless wrist with deep concern, slowly releasing spiritual power into her blood vessels to take a look at her injuries. However, Han Li regretted having done such a rash action immediately afterwards. Upon pouring just a slight amount of spiritual power into her body, a huge attractive force suddenly appeared and caused Han Li's spiritual power to wildly flood into her like a dam had broken. Han Li was greatly alarmed and attempted to let go, but he found that his hands were firmly stuck and was unable to break free. Unexpectedly, his other hand was also helplessly caught by this attractive force, causing his magic power to flow out at double the speed. Han Li was aghast as he felt every drop of his bitterly cultivated true essence forcefully sucked out by the masked woman. To make matters worse, the attractive force only grew stronger as time passed, making Han Li lose his head from panic. Not daring to repeat the same mistake by pushing her off with his legs, Han Li was at his wit's end as his hands continued to be rigidly stuck. Han Li could only helplessly stare on as his mid-foundation establishment cultivation degraded to early foundation establishment, and then as early foundation establishment fell into chi condensation, and as he felt his heart bleed, Han Li found that he could not longer endure, and his gaze blackened before he fainted and fell onto the body of the masked woman. Fragrant and soft, before Han Li lost consciousness, this single lustful thought flashed through his mind. As such, a man and a woman were intimately tangled with one another in a quiet cave. But since both of them were unconscious, Han Li's spiritual power still continued to slowly and uncontrollably flow into the woman's body. After an unknown amount of time, Han Li eventually woke up in a daze. But just as he drowsily opened his eyes, Han Li found himself looking at an attractive, slender silhouette standing outside the tree cave, surveying the scene outside with her back facing Han Li. Han Li blankly looked on for a moment before feeling a severe headache. After holding back his voice with great difficulty, he recalled the event before he passed out. Fearful, Han Li hastily used his spiritual sense to examine his body. His heart dropped to the deepest depths. Not only did his cultivation revert back to chi condensation, it had dropped to the third layer. He was left completely dumbfounded as if he had been struck by lightning. While Han Li was at a loss, the slender woman softly asked without turning her head, "You're awake." Han Li woke from his stupor, and with an unsightly expression he couldn't help but furiously ask, "Nangong Wan, what happened? I saved you with good intentions, yet you absorbed my magic power." "Nangong Wan, you know my elder cousin." The woman finally turned around. She had already taken off her hood, allowing Han Li to clearly see her face. Han Li was shocked. Although her extremely beautiful appearance was quite similar to Nangong Wan, her delicate oval face along with her delicate eyebrows were completely unfamiliar to Han Li. "Who are you? How is this possible? I clearly heard the Devil Dao cultivators called you Senior Nangong, and your voice," Han Li blankly murmured to himself in complete confusion. But suddenly, his complexion turned deathly pale and couldn't bring himself to speak further. This was because he finally recalled the clear but subtle difference between this woman's voice and Nangong Wan's voice. Her voice was more hoarse. At the time, he had believed that Nangong Wan was severely injured, causing her voice to change as a result. However, this oversight had caused this mishap to occur. Not only did he mistakenly rescue someone, but his cultivation had been sucked dry by the person he rescued. Over 10 years of bitter cultivation had completely disappeared in a day. As Han Li felt both dismay and dejection, his complexion alternated between red and white. This female cultivator, who claimed to be Nangong Wan's younger cousin, gave Han Li a dignified smile and said something that left him stunned. "Are you Yellow Maple Valley's Han Li?" "How does Senior know my name?" Han Li's spirit strongly shook. Since he saw that this woman had no intentions of killing him, and with reassuring thoughts of the three essence revolutions technique, he managed to calm down. "Elder cousin and I are as close as sisters. We hide nothing from each other. She had spoken to me about your previous incident." The woman's expression was indifferent. Neither joy nor anger could be made out. Han Li was speechless. Did you know? When I found out about this incident, my first thought was to run over to Yellow Maple Valley and dismember you into 8 pieces, feeding your corpse to the dogs. The woman's eyes suddenly flashed with cold light. Her words were filled with a murderous tone, leaving Han Li pale. Chapter 362, Nangongbing. The woman appeared as gentle as always, but her words were as cold as a blade's edge, causing Han Li's heart to tremble. Han Li let out a long sigh before saying something that left the woman somewhat surprised. Did Senior change her mind in the end? It seems you aren't completely useless. At the very least, you seem to have some brains, the woman calmly said. If Senior truly wished to kill me, I never would have had the chance to open my eyes, Han Li chuckled. I'm called Nangongbing. Don't call me Senior this or Senior that. It will make me seem old. The woman expressionlessly turned her head back and spoke with an unquestionable tone. Han Li was stunned and inwardly insulted her. Since you're a core formation cultivator, doesn't that make you the age of an ancient woman in mortal's years? As Han Li's true essence had been absorbed by her, he naturally held a bellyful of stifled hate towards her. But since his life was currently in her hands, he could only inwardly curse at her. Although I was mistaken for my elder cousin yesterday and was rescued under that presumption, in the end, you are still my savior. Furthermore, I unintentionally absorbed your true essence afterwards, which did stabilize my injuries. The woman leisurely spoke with her back facing Han Li. Let's leave it be. Since your esteemed self is Nangong Wan's younger cousin, I was just out of luck. Han Li wrinkled his brow and spoke with a tone of helplessness. Afterwards, he stretched his arms and stood. Papa, Han Li saw a white silhouette flash by, carrying a fragrant wind. The woman then gave him 2 heavy slaps, causing him to spin in place and fall to the floor. You? Han Li covered his stinging cheeks in astonishment and looked at Nangongbing in furious surprise. Yesterday, you actually dared to touch my body with your hands without permission. Furthermore, you dared to lay down on me while I was unconscious. Those 2 slaps were only to reprimand you. Nangongbing spoke with a cold voice, but when she mentioned that Han Li had lain down on her, her face turned slightly red for just a moment. Han Li was at a loss for words. To give justifications for his breach of etiquette against a female core formation cultivator was simply asking for trouble. If he were to dispute it, it was likely he'd be met with another 2 slaps. And now, with his cheeks feeling raw, there was absolutely no way he could do such a thing. Furthermore, he faintly felt that the reason why she was treating him this way wasn't because of his actions yesterday. She was most likely venting her anger for what had happened between him and Nangong Wan. With that in mind, Han Li strongly suppressed the fury in his heart and lightly caressed his swollen cheeks in silence. Nangongbing was somewhat surprised to see that Han Li had decided to tactfully let the matter go. She had expected that Han Li would want to argue over yesterday's actions. In that event, she had planned to further embarrass Han Li without any explanation. But now that Han Li was tactfully silent, she had no excuse to further act. As a result, she could only snort and speak bluntly. Since that matter has been resolved with the previous slaps, I must address the repayment of your great kindness. You have 2 choices. One is that I give you enough spirit stones to leave you at a loss for words. This would be payment for both your kind assistance and the loss of your cultivation. As for the second choice, you could follow me back to my evacuated sect members. After our 6 sects restabilize, I can refine spirit pills and find a young female disciple from my sect for you to pair cultivate with, restoring your original cultivation at the quickest speed. As you've only lost your true essence, your recultivation will meet no bottlenecks. According to my estimates, you should be able to recover your original cultivation in less than 20 years. Naturally, I would be happy to perhaps repay you with a few of my own sect's secret techniques during that time. Our masked moon sect differs from the varied and disorganized techniques of your Yellow Maple Valley. Our sect has many secret techniques that are wondrous beyond imagination, which cannot be divulged to outsiders. The technique I used to unintentionally absorb your cultivation yesterday is one of such techniques. After Nangongbing said this with pride, she calmly stared at Han Li, waiting for his decision. Han Li was lost in amazement. These 2 choices had a stunningly huge disparity. One choice was to just leave him be with spirit stones. As for the other, not only would she assist him with restoring his cultivation, she would also find him a pair cultivation partner and willingly teach him a few secret techniques. As Han Li heard this, he became more convinced that this woman deliberately wanted him to choose the second option. This was truly strange. Could it be that she had arranged a trap for him? He hesitantly glanced at Nangong Bing and saw an indistinct but complex expression, as if she was both expectant and anxious. Han Li's mind blanked in confusion. He gave his nose a firm rub and then folded his arms. With his right hand grasping his chin, he entered deep contemplation. Han Li remained silent for no less than the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. But Nangong Bing could no longer wait and hastily asked, "How about it? Have you come to a decision?" Han Li lifted his head and saw that she wore an impatient expression. After taking a thoughtful glance at her, he unhurriedly said, "I've decided. I choose the first option. Senior only has to give me the spirit stones. Senior need not worry further about me. I will think about how to recover my cultivation on my own." Han Li wore an indifferent expression. When Nangong Bing heard Han Li's decision, she stared blankly before revealing a somewhat odd expression. She stared at Han Li's face for a moment before suddenly raising her hand, throwing over a red storage pouch. "The spirit stones are in there. There are also a few commonly used materials inside." Nangong Bing's tone was gloomy and cold. Han Li didn't pay her tone any mind and caught the storage pouch without formality, sweeping his spiritual sense through it. Although he had prepared himself, he was still astounded upon seeing the many tens of mid-grade spirit stones in the bag, as well as an assortment of all kinds of materials. Han Li suddenly revealed some joy and raised his head, eagerly asking, "Does Senior have any more pieces of origin jade that she can spare?" The woman's eyes flashed with surprise. After wordlessly searching her body for a moment, she handed Han Li several pieces of white jade, much to his delight. He had now acquired the materials needed for restoring the transportation formation. He no longer had to go out and search for them. Nangong Bing coldly stared at Han Li before expressionlessly saying, "Is there anything else? If not, then I will take my leave." "Oh, there is nothing left to trouble Senior with." Han Li shook his head after correcting his expression. Nangong Bing then gave a charming snort before turning around and leaving the tree hollow. But before she walked outside, she turned her head over and calmly said, "Han Li, I don't know whether your choice was made out of stupidity or because you think yourself to be clever." A jade sword flew out from her sleeve. Her white silhouette blurred before appearing on the sword. At that moment, Han Li lazily said something from behind her. "Senior, please don't forget to send my regards to Nangong Wan." Nangong Bing froze for a moment before wordlessly turning into a streak of white light, leaving the tree hollow far behind. It was unknown whether she had agreed or if she had completely ignored him. Han Li bitterly laughed and rubbed his nose, simply dropping down to sit on the ground. He blankly stared outside the entrance and became lost in thought. He still didn't understand how his cultivation was absorbed by that woman. Could it be that the techniques of the masked moon sect were truly so overbearing? Was it even more strange than the Black Fiend School's blood sacrifice? However, Han Li believed that this cultivation art that absorbed others' cultivation was certain to have many restrictions and flaws. Otherwise, the masked moon sect's cultivators would have long been at war with the cultivation world. Han Li's presumption was somewhat correct. It was a complete coincidence that Nangong Bing was able to absorb his true essence. After having made full use of her secret technique earlier, her own true essence had been greatly damaged. Had nothing happened, her cultivation would have faced a great decline. Although it wasn't enough to make her descend back into Foundation establishment, she was certain to face a loss of several tens of years of bitter cultivation. In addition, she believed that she would have fallen into the hands of the Devil Dao cultivators once her secret technique lost its effect. As a result, she clenched her teeth and activated the divine ability of her cultivation art, the true art of reincarnation. Once this divine ability was used, anybody who used spiritual power to probe her body would have their true essence forcefully absorbed by the true essence whirlpool formed inside her body. Had she not awoken early and halted her technique, she would have absorbed every last shred of Han Li's cultivation. Naturally, the restrictions of this strange divine ability were extremely demanding. First of all, it required that her true essence was in a state of great deficiency. Secondly, if she didn't absorb anybody's true essence during the duration of this technique, her true essence would explode, causing her to die. It could be said that this technique was partially suicidal. But what made this technique the most undesirable was the fact that even if the user absorbed someone else's true essence, they would only be able to recover a fraction of their lost cultivation. This technique was unable to be used to increase one's magic power or cultivation. Chapter 363, Transfer. Not long after that, Han Li walked out of the tree hollow and flew off. Han Li was even more cautious this time around. During his entire journey, he used his spiritual sense to its greatest extent. Upon hearing even the wind rustling the grass, he would immediately go into hiding. After all, it would be extremely dangerous to negligently run into a cultivator with his current cultivation. Thus, with paranoid levels of carefulness, Han Li eventually arrived back at his underground cave after taking up nearly twice the time he had been away. Only after he entered his 5 elements reversal formation did he truly let out a breath of relief. As for Crooked Soul, he was still obediently sitting at the side of the formation. When Han Li saw that Crooked Soul had remained in the exact same posture that he had left him in, he couldn't help but smile. Han Li knew that restoring his cultivation wasn't a matter requiring merely 3 or 4 years. As such, he didn't meditate or take any pills to cultivate. Instead, he spent the following days wholeheartedly focused on restoring the ancient transportation formation. Under his current circumstances, traveling to a country far away was much too dangerous. He could only hope that he would be able to use the ancient transportation formation after restoring it. Although Han Li's cultivation had greatly declined, it did not obstruct his restoration work. After a sleepless week, he had completely finished its restoration. Han Li, a normally cool-headed person, felt his heart stir as he looked at the completed ancient transportation formation. He was at the most crucial step with regards to failure or success. He had to test whether another transportation formation was safely connected to his. If the other end of the transportation formation was damaged, or if it no longer existed, then it would naturally be of no use. He could only bury his thoughts of using the transportation formation and find another path forward. With that in mind, Han Li calmly placed down low-grade spirit stones, one after another on the edge of the transportation formation. When he finished placing the last spirit stones, Han Li hastily took several steps back and couldn't help but look on with bated breath. This ancient formation that was created countless years ago suddenly hummed and flashed with yellow radiance before quickly fading away into darkness. Han Li's heart dropped. Could it be that the ancient transportation formation on the other end was disabled? This would mean that everything he had done was a complete waste. Han Li couldn't help but reveal complete disappointment, but still, he was unresigned. He began walking in circles around the transportation formation with hands behind his back while occasionally muttering to himself. He suddenly stopped and tightly creased his brow as if he had thought of something. He then crouched down and picked up the low-grade spirit stone at the center of the formation. Han Li took a close look at it and let out a breath of cold air. The spirit stone was spent and no longer held any trace of spiritual qi. Han Li revealed a thoughtful expression before suddenly brightening up. Without the slightest hesitation, he took out several sparkling mid-grade spirit stones and exchanged them with the low-grade spirit stones he had placed down before. If he had guessed correctly, the formation didn't activate because low-grade spirit stones provided an insufficient amount of spiritual qi. After placing down the final spirit stone, the transportation formation immediately started to emit a muffled hum before erupting with huge spiritual ripples. A blinding yellow light shot out from the center of the formation spell and shot outside the cave. The 5 elements reversal formation was unable to block it in the slightest. When Han Li saw this, he was stunned, but something immediately came to mind and his face turned deathly pale. At nearly the same time, he suddenly heard huge rumbling sounds from outside the cave. Although he was protected by the huge formation, Han Li still felt the earthquaking vibrations. Han Li's expression grew tense, and he hastily beckoned Crooked Soul as he walked toward the transportation formation. He couldn't help but hesitate. He truly had no idea where the transportation formation would take him. He had originally planned to verify what kind of place was at the other end. After confirming the absence of danger, he would then decide whether or not he should remain there. But now that the ancient transportation formation was exposed, this would be a trip of no return. While Han Li was hesitating, he heard a frightening boom from above and looked up in fright. He saw that the cave roof had been ripped away by some unknown magic tool and blinding sunlight shot through, clearly illuminating what was occurring in the cave. A large group of Devil Dao cultivators hovered above the now exposed cave. They all revealed astonishment once they saw Han Li and the ancient transportation formation shining with yellow light. "You again!" A furious yell came from the crowd of Devil Dao cultivators. 3 people flew out. The one in the middle wore a silver mask, the Ghost Spirit Sect's young master Wang Chan. 2 eccentrics stood beside him, A shriveled, white-haired old man and a young child with red lips and white teeth, the Lee brothers one. First introduced in Chapter 254. They are core formation cultivators and the Ghost Spirit Sect young master's personal bodyguards, who previously appeared at Yanling Castle. Ancient Transportation Formation. When the Lee brothers saw the origin of yellow radiance, they couldn't help but look at each other and shout out in pleasant surprise. Wang Chan stared blankly for a moment. He then asked ecstatically, "Did you see correctly? Is it really an ancient transportation formation?" Wang Chan's voice trembled slightly. He clearly understood what an intact ancient transportation formation signified for one sect. The shriveled Lee brother chuckled. Just as he thought of saying something, his expression suddenly grew stricken. "Not good. That brat is about to use it. Quickly stop him." As he said this, he shot a streak of black light straight toward Han Li. He knew that once the transportation formation was activated, there would be a moment of delay before it could be used. That delay was more than enough for him to kill any junior several times over. But just as his magic treasure flew into the cave, a brilliant light erupted, and a rainbow barrier blocked the streak of black light. The old man was surprised for a moment but immediately recovered. With a sinister expression, he yelled, "Everyone, attack! This brat has laid down a formation spell. We must break through it as quickly as possible or else it will be too late." Upon hearing the order from their sect elder, the Devil Dao cultivators promptly released their magic tools as if they had woken up from a dream. Even Wang Chan and the childlike Li brother struck down upon the spell formation. Han Li's 5 elements reversal formation was merely a simplified version of the grand formation. Under the attacks of 2 core formation cultivators and a crowd of foundation establishment cultivators, the rainbow light barrier immediately distorted and appeared as if it were about to collapse. At that moment, Han Li had already brought Crooked Soul with him to the center of the formation. With a command medallion in hand and tightly shut eyes, he muttered under his breath, completely ignoring the attacks of the Devil Dao cultivators. "A greater displacement medallion. That brat actually has such a magic tool." The old man snarled in a fluster upon clearly seeing the command medallion in Han Li's hand. He suddenly linked his hands together, and a huge amount of black light threads surged, shooting down at the light barrier below. The formation released several cries before finally reaching its limit, and the rainbow light barrier exploded. Without the strange rainbow light to protect him, the overbearing wave of attacks was about to engulf Han Li. But at that very moment, Han Li opened his eyes and spouted out one word with an icy tone: "Transfer." The yellow light suddenly surged. Within the yellow radiance, Han Li and Crooked Soul disappeared without a trace. The wave of attacks had completely missed their mark. The Devil Dao cultivators in the sky were left dumbstruck. The complexions of Wang Chan and the Li brothers were ashen. Since they didn't have a greater displacement medallion, they were unable to chase after Han Li. A moment later, the transportation formation's yellow light suddenly faded away. Upon seeing this, Wang Chan and his guards grew incomparably furious. Naturally, they knew that Han Li, the one who had just used this formation, had destroyed the other end. Even if they found a greater displacement medallion, they would be unable to use the formation. Wang Chan, with bitter resentment still fresh in his heart, was unwilling to give up. Using his status as the sect's young master, he sent for several cultivators to guard the formation day and night for the mere purpose of preventing Han Li from escaping, should he repair the formation and return. If that time came, he would make certain to capture Han Li alive and properly repay him for the great kindness of repeatedly obstructing his plans. But shortly afterwards, the Devil Dao would begin the next step of their expansion, and the Ghost Spirit Sect's young master would start to oversee campaigns in other areas. As a result, this matter was quickly dropped to the back of his mind. As for the cultivation world of the Heavenly South region, it would remain in turmoil for a long time to come. In the next 2 years, an alliance would be formed by the remaining countries to resist the powers of the Devil Dao and Righteous Dao Alliance, known as the Heavenly Dao Alliance. This created yet another superpower within the Heavenly South region. The 3 superpowers had near equal strength and campaigned against one another. After a short amount of time, it seemed that they had reached a stalemate. As for the 6 sects, they eventually arrived at the 9 Nations Union. They contended with the local sects for natural resources such as spirit veins and spirit stone mines, managing to establish a new foothold. Naturally, if the Mulan tribe's spell soldiers were to invade the 9 countries, the 6 sects would dispatch men to combat them. They no longer possessed the same leisure they had back at the state of Yue. As a result, Many Foundation establishment cultivators and core formation experts perished in battle against the spell soldiers. Han Li's former master, Li Huayuan, was one such example, dying in an intense battle that took place over 10 years later. But in contrast, a new generation of 6 sect cultivators quickly matured. Many core formation cultivators eventually rose from the ranks of their Foundation establishment cultivators. Volume 4 Across the Sea. Chapter 364, An Isolated Island and a Huge Ship. My head feels heavy. This was the first thought that came to Han Li's mind upon waking up. After Han Li and Crooked Soul started the transfer, he felt immense pressure from the yellow light enveloping him. But fortunately, the Greater Displacement Medallion promptly released a faint azure light, causing the pressure to immediately disappear at the cost of it wildly draining the spiritual power in his body. However, Han Li was prepared and wasn't alarmed. This change caused by the Greater Displacement Medallion had been described in ancient records. In an instant, the medallion stopped absorbing spiritual chi, and the yellow light around him faded away. He and Crooked Soul had arrived in a dark, indistinct place. As there was very little light, Han Li was unable to clearly see his surroundings, but based on the silence, there shouldn't be anyone nearby. Han Li felt relieved and walked out of the spell formation. But he felt a sudden burst of dizziness after just a few steps. His legs grew soft and he fell on his behind, feeling the urge to vomit from his discomfort. Han Li knew that the long-distance teleportation had left him feeling unwell, and the severity of his current discomfort was caused by his low cultivation. However, now was not the time to deal with it. He quickly commanded Crooked Soul to destroy the transportation formation. Crooked Soul expressionlessly took out the huge silver sword he was previously given and chopped the spell formation into pieces. When Han Li saw this, he finally relaxed. He then sat on the ground and rested for a moment, eventually adapting to the darkness of the cave. He had a vague feeling that this room seemed to have been abandoned a long time ago. Not only was it pitch black, there was also a dense smell of decay. He touched the floor to find a thick layer of dust. This caused Han Li to feel more at ease. At the very least, nothing dangerous would appear for the time being. A long while later, Han Li's feeling of discomfort eventually passed, and he stood up using his hand to support him. After that, Han Li took out a moonlight stone from his storage pouch and was able to clearly see the room. Just as he had suspected, this place was a stone room that had been uninhabited for a long time. There was nothing of note except for a stone door across from him. Han Li turned his head to glance at the destroyed transportation formation. After a moment of hesitation, he turned his attention to the door and attempted to forcefully push it open. Much to his surprise, Han Li was able to easily open it. Han Li was astonished. A huge flight of limestone stairs appeared before him. He slowly turned his gaze upward and saw that there was no end. Just like the room, the stairs also had a layer of dust on them. It was clear that no one had came here for quite some time. After taking another look back at the room behind him, he discovered that the stone room was actually a small mountain cave. Han Li pondered for a moment before lightly shaking his head with ridicule. He then slowly climbed up the stairs with Crooked Soul following behind him. The flight of stairs wasn't very long. After turning a corner, Han Li was already able to see the exit. A huge mountain rock was blocking the round exit. Han Li wrinkled his brow and commanded Crooked Soul without the slightest hesitation, "Split it open." Han Li then took a step to the side. Crooked Soul moved forward with a large stride and grasped the silver sword above his head. He easily chopped the rock into pieces as if it were soft tofu, allowing blinding sunlight to seep in along with a burst of fresh air. Han Li took a deep breath in and out. Ever since he was teleported here, he had held his breath, unwilling to breathe due to the strange scent within the cave. The fresh air was a liberation from the suffocating atmosphere. However, he was a bit confused as to why the air was moist and had a faintly salty taste. He had never smelled such a unique scent before. With that question in mind, Han Li walked past Crooked Soul and took a look outside with eyes squinting from the blazing sun. Han Li was left stunned by what he saw. As far as the eye could see, he saw endless expanse of dark blue water. Han Li was lost in amazement for a long while before finally waking up. Could this be the legendary sea? Han Li thought with pleasant surprise. The largest bodies of water Han Li had seen previously were the huge 100-meter-wide rivers at the land province. He had heard of such a vast, limitless ocean in books, but now that he saw it with his own eyes, he felt a huge shock unlike any other. After gazing at the scene from above, Han Li lowered his head and thought about his location, revealing some confusion a few moments later. He was located on a relatively tall cliff, and while the bottom of the cliff wasn't far, it bordered a huge ocean. Waves from the huge ocean repeatedly struck against the reef below. Stroking his chin, Han Li pondered for a while. The color of this ocean's water was entirely different from the description of the endless sea, as it appeared to be the color of a normal sea. It seemed that he had been transported from the heavenly south region to the coastline of some unknown region. Nevertheless, there was nothing that he could recognize here. Being outside of the heavenly south region, he felt uncertain and wasn't able to make out any familiar features in this place. With that in mind, Han Li didn't immediately set off on his magic tool. Instead, he closed his eyes and slowly released his spiritual sense to see whether there were any cultivators nearby. After the time it took to make a cup of tea, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense and revealed a strange expression. He wordlessly released his divine wind boat. With a flash of light, he soared through the sky without the slightest effort at concealment. After he was about 100 meters in the air, Han Li stopped and stood at the front of the boat, surveying the scenery around him. Everything he saw was tinted with deep blue light. The sparkling light of the sea's rippling waves blurred Han Li's vision. He was above an isolated island about 6 kilometers wide. As for the cliff he flew out of, it was only a small protruding hill on the island. Han Li stroked his nose and bitterly smiled. This was truly troublesome. Although there seemed to be no danger here, he was unable to cultivate on this island. The island's spiritual qi was extremely thin. If he wanted to mature spiritual herbs, he would require a place with adequate spiritual qi. Otherwise, the green liquid would be ineffective. In addition, due to the strong spiritual nature of precious spiritual herbs, abundant spiritual qi was required. This left Han Li feeling very helpless. Han Li sailed around the island once through, and found that there weren't any other islands nearby. In addition, this small island had no life aside from mountainous trees and small snakes. As a result, he could only sigh and return to the cave. Once he returned, Han Li first slept off his headache without any interruptions. He had previously worked on restoring the formation over many days without sleeping, leaving him completely exhausted. These problems were best tackled after he had slept his fill. With Crooked Soul guarding him, Han Li slept soundly for an entire day. Once he woke up, Han Li stood alone atop the mountain and stared at the sea while lost in thought. After an unknown amount of time, Han Li expressionlessly flew down the mountain and found a suitably sized stone to block the cave. Then, with Crooked Soul on board, he circled the vicinity on his boat and confirmed the direction of the setting sun before flying off without hesitation. Han Li guessed that since there was nobody on the island with the transportation formation, there must be some other island or land nearby. Otherwise, who would head out to the middle of nowhere and construct such an expensive ancient transportation formation? Naturally, Han Li didn't know which direction was correct. He had already decided to fly in this direction for several days. If there were no traces of any cultivators or mortals, he would go back and fly in a different direction. Although this method was extremely clumsy, it was Han Li's only choice in this unfamiliar sea. In any case, he had plenty of spirit stones in his storage pouch. He didn't have to worry about running out of spiritual power. Perhaps Han Li's luck was especially good that day. He only had to fly for half a day before finding a huge seafaring ship. Han Li was delighted. After all, dealing with mortals would be much smoother compared to negotiating with cultivators. But Han Li felt a bit baffled upon looking at the huge ship. The hull of the ship strangely had no mast or sails. At the ship bow, there were over 10 huge fish quickly pulling the ship forward. Although these fish had huge bodies and a mouth filled with sharp teeth, he felt that they didn't possess the slightest spiritual qi and weren't demonic beasts by any measure. If this were not the case, Han Li wouldn't have dared to go near the ship. Chapter 365, Wang Changqing. Han Li gazed at those huge 10-meter-long fish from a distance and flew around the ship twice before finally deciding to head towards it. It was clear that those on the ship had seen Han Li coming. With a few loud shouts, a huge crowd of over 300 people amassed, filling the entire bow of the ship. Once these people saw Han Li hovering in midair, they revealed reverence and started to bow and salute Han Li. While Han Li was amazed by the display, a luxuriously dressed middle-aged man stepped forward from the crowd and nervously said something. He helplessly stood by as if he were waiting for Han Li's command. Han Li stroked his nose and bitterly laughed. He wasn't able to understand or make sense of a single word of their language. The question of how to communicate with them made his head hurt. Seeing that Han Li didn't reply, the middle-aged man grew panicked and urgently said something. Although Han Li didn't understand what he said, he was able to make out what he meant. Han Li wrinkled his brow. After some thought, he spoke out in the common tongue of the heavenly south region. "If there is anyone here that can understand my words, please tell me." Han Li then swept his gaze across the crowd. The middle-aged man appeared at a loss. It was quite obvious that he didn't understand what Han Li had said. As for the others, they were also left baffled. Han Li helplessly sighed and started to use the words of several different ancient languages, using them each once through. He had initially learned these ancient languages in order to cultivate tongue-twisting incantations, but he hadn't mastered them in the slightest. Eventually, a gray-haired old man from the crowd seemed to have reacted to one of the languages. Han Li felt overjoyed upon seeing this and pointed toward the old man. "Old man, do you understand my words?" Han Li slowly spoke using the ancient language. As he didn't use the language often, he was very unfamiliar with it. When the old man heard Han Li, he hesitated for a moment before walking to the side of the middle-aged man. Also using the ancient language, he respectfully replied. This old man, Wang Changqing, had indeed learned this immortal clan's language when he was young. Does this immortal master have any commands? Han Li revealed a slight smile upon seeing that the old man had understood the ancient language. His figure suddenly flashed, and he appeared beside the old man, startling both the old and middle-aged man. Han Li spoke with a gentle tone. "As you well know, I am not able to speak the local tongue. I only passed by here to ask about a few matters. There is no need to panic." He had previously swept his spiritual sense throughout the huge boat and found that the ship only housed mortals. Because he found no cultivators, he was able to descend without worry. Han Li didn't pay notice to the mutterings of the old and middle-aged man. Instead, he beckoned to his divine wind boat in the sky, causing it to slowly descend toward the ship bow. After Crooked Soul got off the divine wind boat, the small boat quickly shrunk into a small white light and flew into Han Li's hand. After this was done, Han Li took a sideways glance. Although the mortals on the ship saw this, they didn't appear shocked at all and maintained their original reverent expression. They were clearly accustomed to seeing cultivators and their tricks. Otherwise, they wouldn't have appeared nearly as calm. Also, since these people didn't seem to come from particularly exceptional backgrounds, it appeared that it wasn't taboo for the cultivators of this land to reveal themselves to mortals. Han Li thought with a pensive expression. Currently, the old man had translated Han Li's words for the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man was initially shocked before revealing pleasant surprise. He then said a long string of unintelligible words towards Han Li with an extremely excited expression. Han Li felt at a loss and couldn't help but turn his gaze towards the old man. The old man naturally understood what Han Li meant. He quickly gave Han Li an explanation. "Great Immortal, this man is Sir Gu, the master of this ship. He intends to invite you to reside as a guest at his residence on the Stalwart Star Island. He is willing to supply the resources for your cultivation." Stalwart Star Island. Han Li rubbed his chin and gave a noncommittal response. Seeing that Han Li wore an indifferent expression, the middle-aged man became even more fervent and uttered another long string of words. This time, he revealed an apologetic smile. Han Li didn't need the old man's translation to understand why he wanted to invite Han Li to stay on the Stalwart Star Island. Without waiting for the old man to translate, Han Li bluntly waved his hand and said, "First, tell the ship's master that I am new to this noble land and am unfamiliar with the local conventions. Consequently, I am not able to agree to anything. I will decide whether I want to stay on his Stalwart Star Island after I am given an explanation. Also, I currently do not understand your language. I hope he will allow me to follow this ship for a few days so that I may learn the local language and a few local conventions from you in passing." Not daring to slight Han Li, he hurriedly gave the middle-aged man a translation. When the middle-aged man heard Han Li, he revealed obvious disappointment, but still, he respectfully saluted Han Li and loudly yelled a few words behind him. Suddenly, everyone on the bow withdrew from the deck like a swarm of bees. After giving the old man his reply, he also withdrew. As such, only Han Li and the old man remained at the ship's bow. The old man smiled to Han Li and said, "Immortal Master, Master Gu has agreed to your request. In addition, he has given you a room on the ship. Please follow me." Han Li agreed, indifferently nodding his head. As such, Han Li and Crooked Soul followed the old man, Wang Changqing, into the ship. It's certainly large. That was Han Li's first thought upon entering the ship's hold. The ship's hold had paths and corridors in every direction and an unknown number of rooms. Whenever immortals saw Han Li, they revealed reverent expressions and made way for Han Li. After several turns, Han Li and Crooked Soul arrived at a comparatively large wooden door. Wang Changqing pushed open the door without any hesitation and stepped to the side, inviting Han Li to enter first. Han Li didn't bother being polite and entered the room with Crooked Soul in tow, taking a look around afterwards. The room was quite decent. Not only was it quite large, it also didn't feel stuffy at all. But what caused Han Li to be most curious was a small odd tree in a flower pot in the corner of the room. The tree was perfectly straight and was completely branchless with palm-sized triangular leaves growing all over it. In addition, the entire tree glittered with silver light as if it were made out of pure silver. Upon seeing the tree, Han Li revealed great curiosity. When the old man saw Han Li's amazement, he respectfully gave Han Li an explanation. It seems that Immortal Master hasn't seen a silver-angled tree before. It really is an uncommon rarity. Not only is it a gorgeous sight, it freshens and cleans the air when placed inside. It is a seldom-seen treasure for seafarers. It is only because our shipmaster is such a domineeringly rich man that he was able to acquire 4 of them. Han Li faintly smiled but remained silent. How could he not make out that this Wang Changqing was trying to curry favor on the shipmaster's behalf? Han Li had Crooked Soul guard the door and sat down in the room's chair. Wang Changqing reservedly stood at Han Li's side, not daring to sit down as he pleased. Han Li smiled from seeing his restraint and amiably said, "Mr. Wang, there is no need to be so formal. Please take a seat. There are a few things that I'd like to discuss with you." Wang Changqing repeatedly stated that he didn't dare to in a manner of reverence and trepidation. Han Li wrinkled his brow in response and didn't press him any further. After a short moment of thought, he straightforwardly asked, "I'm a cultivator that came here from another land. I was wondering if Mr. Wang could give me an introduction to the nearby regions and customs. Naturally, the more that you can tell me about matters pertaining to cultivators, the better. I will certainly give this elderly man my thanks." As Han Li spoke, his expression was tranquil as can be. Wang Changqing pondered for a moment before slowly saying, "Since Immortal Master came from a foreign land, then I must first tell you that this place is the Scattered Star Sea. We are in the southwest quadrant of this area. The 3 great islands nearby are the Tail Star Island, Stalwart Star Island, and Sang Star Island. Naturally, there are also many islands of smaller sizes with both cultivators and mortals living on each. We share the same conventions as those of other territorial waters. Every island has an island lord, a cultivator with the greatest magic power that is responsible for protecting the island. If other cultivators wish settle on the island and are willing to hold an office, they will be given a set amount of spirit stones from the island lord every year, but they must obey the island lord's commands. Naturally, if one were to reside on an island and was unwilling to hold an office, they would be required to give the island lord a set amount of spirit stones every year if they wished to remain on the island. With that said, Wang Changqing paused, revealing an expression of admiration as if he held great longing towards cultivators. Chapter 366, Master Gu's Business. Wang Changqing continued, "Mortals that live on these islands must perform labor or pay spirit stones. Otherwise, they aren't allowed to reside on the island. Because of the immortal techniques that were placed on these islands, there is no need to fear assault from heavenly winds or demonic beasts. As such, us mortals may live without fear. In addition, the Immortal Master's powers are remarkable. Whenever us mortals travel afar, we spare no effort to hire 1 or 2 Immortal Masters to accompany us. That way, if we come across any demonic beasts while at sea, we will have a chance at living. Naturally, the Immortal Masters that agree to be hired would be comparatively free when compared to those previously mentioned." Heavenly Wind. Han Li was puzzled upon hearing those words. He knew about demonic beasts, but hadn't heard of this Heavenly Wind before. The previous land that Immortal Master resided in didn't have attacks by heavenly wind. The old man appeared to be marveled. "I saw no heavenly winds where I previously cultivated. What are they? Something comparable to demonic beasts?" Han Li calmly asked without care. Although Wang Changqing felt doubtful, he still gave Han Li a sincere explanation. Heavenly winds, demonic beasts, and ghost mists are known as the 3 great natural disasters in the Scattered Star Seas. There is no need to speak of demonic beasts. Immortal Master surely knows about them more than I, but it should be known that most of the demonic beasts of the sea are beyond huge and are proficient in water attribute demonic techniques. Us mortals have no way of dealing with them. Only immortals are able to strike them down. As for heavenly winds, they are hurricanes that occur twice a year that sweep through the entirety of the scattered star seas. The areas it passes suffer from monstrous sea waves, destroying lives and shelters. If we were not on an island protected by immortal techniques, us mortals would face certain doom. It is also said that if an immortal were to be dragged into a heavenly wind, it would be extremely difficult to escape, and they would likely die within. Wang Chengqing appeared fearful as he said this. And the ghost mist, what kind of natural disaster is that? Han Li expressionlessly continued his questions. He wanted to understand these three natural disasters clearly, so that he would be better prepared if he happened to come across them. The old man paused for a moment before continuing. He was truly shocked that the cultivator before him truly knew nothing about the circumstances of the sea or the most mysterious of the three greatest natural disasters, the ghost mist. Where was this cultivator from? Could it be that he came from a place of dry land? But this place was the scattered star seas. Apart from the nearby sea territories, there were no large territories of land to speak of. Restraining his bafflement, Wang Chengqing continued to give Han Li an explanation, not daring to neglect him. The ghost mist is the most fearful and mysterious of the natural disasters of the scattered star seas. It is a black mist that often drifts erratically across the sea. Any life trapped within that black mist will not escape from it. If mortals see it, their death is already decided. As for cultivators, they are no exception either. If cultivators see it, it will be far too late for them to escape as well. Although this mist is terrible, it only appears at certain locations. It never approaches the larger islands. So long as one takes precaution, it is possible to preserve one's life. As a result, this particular natural disaster has killed the fewest people despite being the most fearsome. The old man revealed some joy as he spoke. Han Li sunk into thought after he heard this. What kind of cursed place is this? According to what was said, my plan of finding a small island with spiritual chi to cultivate in seclusion is worthless. Otherwise, I might run into the heavenly wind or ghost mist and meet a miserable end. Having seen that Han Li appeared displeased, the old man became apprehensive. Could it be that I've said something to offend the great immortal? While the old man was anxious, Han Li muttered to himself before asking, "That Master Gu from before, why does he want me to go to his residence on Stalwart Star Island? Also, where is this boat currently heading?" Han Li stared at the old man, with a face revealing neither joy nor anger. The old man's heart thumped when he saw Han Li's indifferent expression, and he couldn't help but hesitate. How could Han Li not see that there was something wrong? He eased up his expression, saying, "Mr. Wang, be at ease. I am only asking this to clearly understand the present circumstances. After all, I can't just casually agree to Master Gu's request without knowing anything. If I only have to help with a few minor errands, I wouldn't mind taking a trip to Stalwart Star Island." Wang Chengqing knew that he could no longer stay silent, else he would greatly offend this immortal and be certain to face a bitter outcome. Thus, after a dry cough, he smiled and spoke while trembling. "This old man begs immortal master to not blame him. In truth, this matter wasn't meant to be concealed. It was just that immortal master hadn't asked." Han Li sardonically rolled his eyes in his mind when he was given these evasive words. Still, the old man tactfully gave an immediate explanation of the situation. Originally, this ship had just finished making a trip for business and was en route to return to Stalwart Star Island. As for Master Gu, he was not born and raised on Stalwart Star Island, but from one of Stalwart Star Island's subsidiary islands instead. But after he became prosperous from business, he had recently decided to move to Stalwart Star Island. The truly lucrative business involved traveling to large, far-away islands, which only mortals of Stalwart Star Island were capable of doing. Mortals that were born on the main island and those born on subsidiary islands held differing statuses. Master Gu's business was originally reselling goods among the subsidiary islands. Only after moving to the main island did he take his business a step further. But after they arrived on the main island, Master Gu made an astonishing discovery. The business of long-distance trading between the great islands wasn't something one could casually participate in. This business had been previously allocated to a set number of parties. Only 10 clans on the island were able to participate in this extremely lucrative business. In addition, these 10 clans were not fixed and unchanging. They were decided in a magic battle that was held every 3 years. If a clan wishes to step into this business, They must request an immortal to undergo this competition. Only with their immortal's victory in the challenge would they be able to acquire the permit to conduct trade between the great islands. When Master Gu learned of this, he lost his head from panic. Because he had previously only performed short-distance trade, he had never hired any cultivators as there was no threat from demonic beasts. As a result, he knew pathetically few cultivators. He originally intended to wait until he had acquired a business and slowly amass the large sum required to hire one. But now, it was far too late. He had received this information close to the date of the next 3-year magic battle. He couldn't possibly have the time to look for a cultivator to hire. Although there were many cultivators at Stalwart Star Island, a majority of them were proud and arrogant. Only a pitiful few were willing to enter employment under a mortal, and most of them would only lend their assistance if they had some relation beforehand. As for the 10 cultivators he was somewhat acquainted with, they found it embarrassing to participate in the challenge. Running short on time, Master Gu was unable to find any willing cultivators on Stalwart Star Island. Without any better option, he took a trip to deliver goods back to the island he was born on, and he took advantage of that opportunity to ask for the assistance of a distant relative who had some relation to a cultivator. But he truly didn't expect that this particular cultivator had left on a distant journey. Master Gu had been truly left dumbstruck. But now Han Li, a foreign cultivator, had entered his boat. Having finally found a cultivator despite his previous disconcerting failures had left Master Gu overjoyed. Although he didn't know the level of Han Li's cultivation, it was better than being forced to give up and wait for another 3 years. Therefore, he had previously attempted to rope Han Li in at all costs and have Han Li fight on his behalf. Having heard this, Han Li was left completely speechless. When he heard that cultivators were hired by mortals to go to sea, he found this unbelievable. But now having heard that cultivators fought magic battles on behalf of mortals for the qualifications to do trade between large islands, Han Li was temporarily at a loss for words. It seemed that, although cultivators in this area were an aloof and remote crowd, they did not feel that it was beneath their dignity to work under mortals. Instead, it seemed that mortals and cultivators shared some sort of tangled relationship here. However, he'd rather avoid participating in a magic battle for Master Gu's long-distance trade qualifications. He was not so desperate for pay. But he still felt somewhat uncertain. With a faint smile, he slowly asked, "Mr. Wang, I am truly inexperienced. I still have something I must consult with you about. If there is anything Immortal Master does not understand, please ask. This old man will do his best to answer." The old man respectfully replied with haste. "I find myself at a loss. If one wanted to carry goods between islands, why would they have ordinary mortals ferry them across the sea? Are immortals unwilling to use their storage pouch and other such magic tools? Isn't flying both faster and safer?